Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Sangji, welcome to the Sikh Press Association's third event. This is called Does the Media Understand Khalistan? So just a little bit of background before we kick off. The Sikh Press Association is part of Everything's 13, which was a charity founded by the late Dr Singh. And Dr Singh firmly believed that the best way to use Sangat money was to invest in people who serve the Band. And before we get started, we just want to say that this event cost around £900 to put on today. So we would love to keep doing these events, and we would love to keep having your support and your donations so that we can ensure that these events continue. Something that you will all know is that the topic of Khalistan is quite an emotive issue, and please bear that in mind tonight. Please note that this is an event that will discuss the media portrayal of Khalistan and not the issue or the notion of Khalistan itself. This is not a pro or against debate. This is a discussion about the media portrayal of Khalistan. And on that note, any questions or comments that aren't in that remit will not be entertained, for the reason that we can keep the discussion courteous and respectful. And I would like to say that this is a Sangat environment, so this is just a binti to everybody. Please keep the comments and questions just respectful, listen to each other's opinions, and we can debate them in a way that is befitting of Sangat. Just some housekeeping rules. There are no fire drills planned, so if the fire alarm goes off, please make your way at the exit, which was where you came in, around, and then on the court, which is to your left hand side. We have the room until 9 PM, so we hope to finish around 8:45 PM, just to give everybody time to have questions and then to move out. And I think that's it, so I hope you enjoy the event. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.
My name is Jasmine Singh, and I will be attempting to host tonight's event. So the first thing I will do is introduce our panelists. On my far right, we have Dr Gurnam Singh. He's a presenter for Akaal Channel and also a Sikh social commentator. We have Shamsher Singh here, who's a spokesman for the National Sikh Youth Federation, also an activist and a writer. On my left, we have Jasmine Kaur, also known as Five River Flow, a poet and activist. We have Amardeep Bassey, a journalist, and we have Dr Jasjit Singh, who's recently finished a research project on Sikh radicalisation. Moving forward now with our first question. Given examples of coverage over the last year, are the media fair to Khalistan and Khalistan supporters? Once again, given examples of coverage over the last year, are the media fair to Khalistan and Khalistan supporters? And to begin with our discussion, we're going to start with the media professional on the table, Amardeep Bassey.
Thank you. The question itself asks, is the media fair to Khalistan and the Khalistan supporters? I think I'd like to point out firstly that the word fair itself is very subjective. Your fair might be different from my fair. And ultimately, as a journalist, it is debatable whether it is my role to be fair. It is my role to be balanced and present an accurate report, but is it my duty to be fair? That's up for debate, I would guess. It's certainly not something that's...
Would the two not correspond?
Not necessarily. You can have a balanced debate. One side will say that was unfair, the other side will say it's just such a loaded word. Fair is such a subjective word. Whose fairness are we talking about? Do we mean, is the media fair to Khalistanis for Khalistanis, or is the media fair to the Khalistan movement for the wider population? The actual examples that have been given, I would say, are quite blatantly, I wouldn't say, they don't endorse Khalistan. Now, whether that's unfair is going to be a subjective opinion. But the actual reports that are mentioned there are factual reports. There's no comment in them, there's no opinion in them. That's for the reader to decide. So strictly as a journalistic exercise, this point about being fair is up for debate. It's a case of I need to be accurate, I need to be balanced. Whether I need to be fair, that's for my readers.
So just to further that question then, you mentioned commenting in these articles. In these articles that were given as examples that were emailed to all our registries and all attendees, so I do hope you had a look. There was no comment from anyone that would classify themselves as a supporter of Khalistan. In your opinion, is that something that's fair as a journalist?
No, that is shoddy journalism not to have, if you're writing an article about Khalistan, to not have somebody, who's talking on behalf of the Khalistan, that is just, bad journalism. And it's, examples of journalism like that are going to bring about accusations of bias and pressure from governments. So that's a journalistic fault, and it would be correct to say that is unfair not to have the opinion of the subject matter that you're talking about.
Pushing this question now on to Shamsher Singh. So in your opinion, are the media fair to Khalistan and Khalistan supporters? But also answering what Amardeep Bassey just said, what would fairness actually look like in your opinion as somebody who's very openly pro-Khalistani? There's a web series that Shamsher Singh led, which is called The Origins of Khalistan, which over 70,000 people have viewed. So again, in your opinion, what would fairness look like, and are the media fair to Khalistan and Khalistan supporters?
I'd say unequivocally no, the media is not fair to Khalistan. And I'd say beyond that, the media doesn't acknowledge the violence that took place, the epistemic violence, the violence of translation. Like Sikhism is accepted as our religion. How we went from Sikhi to Sikhism, the violence of colonialism, modernity, coloniality. The media shows no awareness of this or analysis of this, yet claims to use ciphers to contort representation, such as being balanced and showing accuracy versus fairness, and making fairness into a subjective experience. When we're talking about the lived realities of the Qawm, of Qawmi Sangharsh, of the realities of people of Punjab who in the hundreds of thousands have voluntarily courted arrest, who turned out in 1986 for the Sarbat Khalsa. So to say whether it's fair, Khalistanis would say the fairness is to the Sikh Panth, and the unfairness that's shown is representing narratives that have began and been perpetuated by the Indian government, and those narratives have been latched onto us and enforced through state violence and terror. I'll give you an example of that very specifically. Every year in June 1984, many of you would read articles about Khalistan, and there's a particular phraseology that's repeated, that has been repeated for the last 25 years. That is that the militants, this Blue Star happened, this operation happened to flush out militants, extremists / terrorists / radicals from the Golden Temple. That was originally reported by the Globe and Mail in June 8th, 1984, and since then has been repeated without any challenge in all mainstream media. And books have picked it up. General Ra, that's where the source came from. He talked about the operations to flush out terrorists. So the media has no fairness, has no understanding of Khalistan at all, or the lived experience, has no understanding of Sikhi or how it's interconnected. In fact, that's one of the biggest areas of fascination for the media, and they're always trying to pry into our community. How is Sikhi and Khalistan connected? Why are Sikhs wearing the stars more? Why are Sikhs going to the Gurdwara more? Is this connected to religious radicalization? Is that then connected to Khalistan? Are Sikhs going to now become terrorists? So the understanding that they show is very limited, completely unfair, completely biased, and we'd say as Khalistanis pro the Indian government's narratives.
I just want to relate one point in relation to what Shamsher Singh just said. The Sikh Press Association, prior to this event, we sent out a questionnaire to approximately 200 different email accounts of media individuals or media organizations. We did only get a very small sample back of media professionals that did fill out that questionnaire, but we still have some telling statistics. And one of the points Shamsher said first was there's no understanding, or the narrative does not include any mention of the Sikh genocide. And in our questionnaire, only 46% of those that filled out our questionnaire said that it's important to relate Khalistan to the Sikh genocide of 1984 and the fake encounters of Punjab police which happened thereafter. So again, only 46% of media professionals felt it was important to relate the Khalistan movement to the Sikh genocide and situations thereafter. Bringing it to you now, Dr Gurnam Singh, do you feel that there's a lack of fairness in the way media report on Khalistan? And as somebody yourself that presents on live TV, on TV in general, is this something that you have to kind of weave your way around?
I think there is. I agree with a lot of what Shamsher said in his analysis, but I would add to that. I would say that, why is there fairness? What's the reason behind that? And I think that just to see it as a conspiracy theory, I think is too simplistic. I would say that the media, many things, but broadly speaking, if you're looking at the print media and to some extent the television media, and particularly in India, but internationally, there's two kinds of positions that you get. You get pro-Indian government, media, and everybody knows that in India, much of the media is bought off. So you get that, and they're probably paid to put that line there. Probably happens in other countries as well. If you think about the Daily Mail and things. But there's also what you find: a lot of people who work in the media are liberals, maybe like me. I don't know, who kind of try to engage in reasonable and rational debate. And I think that one of the problems is I don't think that the Khalistan, those people who are advocating Khalistan, have made a strong enough argument for Khalistan. And that's not an argument against, but it's actually saying that it's such an important struggle that we need to make stronger arguments. And working in the media, where I do bring pro-Khalistanis onto sometimes I'm scared to ask them difficult questions, not because that I'm against Khalistan, but I feel that they might do a disservice to Khalistan. I'll give you a good example of that. Misrepresentation. I had Simranjit Singh Mann a few months ago. I interviewed him. He's seen as a leading figure of the Khalistan movement. And I said, what is your reasoning for Khalistan? And he said, well, the Hindus have got Hindustan, the Pakistanis have got Khalistan, so we can have, Pakistanis have got Pakistan, so we can have Khalistan. So I said, do you then say that the Hindutva is legitimate? Because that's what his argument was. And then he kind of went for me and said, "Tu ki gal karna?" So I think we haven't made the arguments, which is then left as, I think, vulnerable to some of those critiques. Having said that, clearly, all the odds are stacked against us, and nobody can deny that. There are also other big issues around the kind of imperial legacy. Mark Tully, who's reported on the 1984, talked about Bhindranwala as this kind of, almost a kind of Bin Laden type of character. So even that kind of colonial construct is still there. So we are fighting on all corners, but we haven't really put our case across in the way that we should have.
So I'd just like to forward a point that you touched on. Firstly, actually, so we were actually in contact with Mark Tully about being involved in this event, and unfortunately he wasn't able to. But just touching on the point that you mentioned and bringing it to you, Jasmine Kaur, in regards to being given that opportunity to discuss Khalistan in the media and public affairs, we just provided an example of coverage previously. We didn't give any opportunity to Khalistanis to have their say on articles which reference Khalistan. So there was no pro-voice in any of these news reports that we sent out. Do you feel there's a lack of opportunities out there for people to speak about their position of Khalistan?
Personally, I feel that there is a lack of opportunity for people to speak about their views regarding Khalistan, because they either feel like they're going to be either misrepresented straight away, because when you say the word Khalistan, to a lot of people within the Sikh community itself, it has negative connotations of extremism, terrorism. Santji is painted as Dr Gurnam said, as like some Bin Laden Taliban type figure, when he was the exact opposite. And I think spaces like this are extremely important to discuss Khalistan and the way the media portrays it. But relating back to the question as a whole, I think Khalistanis aren't given the opportunities that, say, other groups are given simply because of the type of stereotypical image that exists for them already.
Dr Jasjit Singh, when you were doing your research on Sikh radicalisation, what was your opinion when you were reading up on a lot of the media portrayals which you might have seen in that reference Khalistan? Did you feel that they were fair or sometimes balanced?
So it kind of goes into the second question in a bit, because in terms of reporting on Khalistan, outside the BBC Asian network, the most frequent paper that reports Khalistan is the Daily Mail, surprisingly. Or talks about stories about Khalistan, and much of this appeared to be basically a copy of reports that had been published in Indian media. So it kind of goes into the second question a little bit. Yeah, which I'll probably
problem.
best answering in a second.
Yeah, we will do. So we'll open it up to the audience if anyone would like to comment. So again, the question is, given examples of coverage over the last year, and if you did register online, you would have been given 3 examples from India, Canada and the UK. Are the media fair to Khalistan and Khalistan supporters? Would anyone from the audience like to comment on this?
I got a question. Yeah, I got a question.
Just give a second to the mic, please.
I got a
Sorry, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Hi, my name is Amardeep Bassey, and my question really is about the comments that Jasjit Singh recently made. You were saying that he's the one in India, particularly fronting Khalistan, about the rape example that he gave, which was taken out of context, I felt, and that does nothing for the Khalistan movement in any way. If that's the sort of person that we've got, leading from the front.
Well, that's a prime example of what I'm saying. A lot of people sent it to me saying, you need to do a program on this, you need to... I've stopped, I'm not going to do it, not because, I'm not horrified by this, but I'm so horrified by this that this could damage our cause infinitely. And, I'm sure that the pro-Indian media will pick this up. So I think that's part of the problem, is maybe things get lost in translation. Maybe that's what it's about. Maybe there's a different mindset. It's okay to speak to our own audience, but then when you start to use the same narratives to speak to a wider audience, you actually lose the kind of argument rather than win the argument. So I think that's a perfect example.
I'd just like to add to that as well. I think it's quite unfair to the Khalistan Sangharsh, to the liberation movement of an entire people, to basically interpret it through the words and actions of one individual such as Jasjit Singh. I think that kind of does a bit of an injustice to the complexity of the conversation and how it affects the entire Sikh diaspora and the Sikh population that exists in Indian occupied East Punjab and West Punjab.
Yeah, I'd also like to add on to that. As with any political liberation movement, particularly our one, we're faced with so many different obstacles and so many different forces against us and attacking us, and to just pigeonhole it and to use Jasjit Singh and his comments and to just focus solely on that I think it's frankly an insult to all the hard work and legacies and everything else that is currently going on. So I'm not trying to say brush it under the carpet, but what I'm saying is don't just focus on that one negative thing.
The problem with that is if someone like Jasjit Singh, who seems to be a bit of a poster boy figure for the Khalistan movement, if he's the one who's getting the sound bites out there, he's the one that's being interviewed, if he's the one that the Khalistan movement is putting forward as, listen to this man, and he comes out with the nonsense that he did the other day, the offensive nonsense, and then to laugh about it on camera, how do you expect anybody to take Khalistan or anything to do with Khalistan, certainly in the media, seriously? I mean, that man, I don't know him from Adam, that's the only soundbite, to be honest with you, I've ever heard, but if that's my introduction to the Khalistan movement, then it's not a very good introduction.
So with a brief understanding of the media world, there wouldn't really be much incentive for a journalist to seek more from anyone else, right? Because he is presented as the figurehead, so therefore you'll take his soundbite and there's your news story, right? So is there more work to be done then from people that are pro-Khalistan to kind of...
From what I can see, very little work has been done. It needs to start from scratch. There needs to be a strategy. It needs to be a long-term strategy. You can't, it's talked about as a media war. When there's a war, you have a strategy, you have tactics. You don't just turn your back on the enemy and say, well, forget him, we don't understand what he's on about, he doesn't understand us. The media is not your enemy. It's, in this propaganda war that you talk about, you're up against the Indian machine. That is, very difficult to counteract. And you're not going to counteract it with a disjointed, unthought out plan where one person, one movement is saying one thing, another is saying the other. There's no consistency, there's no thought out plan. It's all been seemingly from, sat on the media side, it seems to be very much hand to mouth, completely reactive, and no strategy. There is no end game to this.
So sitting on the Khalistan side, it's actually really clear to us that there are other voices that exist within the community. If you go online, look at Sikh Siyasat, look at the lectures that they do on Samvad, the way they kind of tackle this, and this is Punjab based, it's indigenous, it's in Punjabi, the Punjabi is incredibly complex, it's difficult to understand, but the basis of the conversation is the impact of colonization, of modernity on us as individuals, on our conversation, on our framing of our understanding of self, our relationship with Gurmat, with Guru, and how we navigate modernity. So there are alternative voices, but this is where we've got to question, what is the media's role? Is it to sensationalize, or is it actually to do the research and actually go into the community and find out what the alternative voices are? But that's when we get into, well, it's too complicated, and it's not the media's role to explain the Khalistan movement. But this is where it comes into the question of myself as an activist. Well, how genuine is the media in actually trying to find out? Because as a Sikh activist, there's a plethora of voices, of positions. I've learned everything from somewhere, right? I didn't just pluck it out of the sky, out of my imagination. So I'm influenced by academics, by thinkers, by writers like Jasmine Singh, that's written quite a number of books on Sikh Sangharsh in Punjabi. So there are things out there. It's just that the media either doesn't want to find them or doesn't know how to find them.
I just want to bring up a stat which might add to both points. 93% of the media professionals that took part in our questionnaire said they were not aware of movements in the 80s which led to the Khalistan movement. So that's 93% said they were not aware of things that happened in the 80s which led to the Khalistan movement. Not to kind of just pin it on yourself, but the first question is literally about the media coverage. Amardeep, do you think, though, on the other side, there's more for the media to do in terms of doing their own investigations, or is it a case of this is a job for them, they've got deadlines to meet, they can't be expected to do all of that legwork?
There's a bit of both. I mean, journalists are professional people who write stories, and you talk about sensational, just like anybody else selling a product, it's got to be written in a way that's going to engage the reader. So, I mean, there's the world of journalism and the way journalism operates and how journalists operate is very much a closed world. Very few people know how news is accumulated, how it's gathered, and it's more a case of what has the journalist left out rather than what is in his story. You should always ask yourself, what isn't in this story and why isn't it there? But this whole attitude of them and us against the media, it's not good for anybody. And ultimately, there is the old saying of keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. If the media is your enemy or seen as a hostile institution, then bring it closer, make it a friend, and that way you can shape the agenda. And yes, your average white Western middle class journalist working for one of the broadsheets or even the tabloids, he wants a quick fix. He wants to be able to say in 10 points, this is Khalistan, black and white, here's the 4 points, here's the pro-Khalistan, here's the anti-Khalistan voices. That's a start. You can have more nuanced and deeper conversations later, but you've got to have a start somewhere. I mean, without getting ahead of myself, this whole Jagtar Johal situation at the moment, absolutely pristine moment for the Khalistan movement to get some kind of traction in the media, worldwide traction, and I think it's an opportunity being missed because there's so much hostility to the media.
But is that opportunity even available if media don't know which kind of routes to go down to?
Again, it's for the Sikh nation and those representing the Sikh nation. I mean, the Sikhs have been in this country or in the West for tens of years. There should, I would have thought by now, be an established media channel, some kind of gatekeeper. Because at the moment we've got so many competing voices. We've got one faction saying one thing. There is no unitary body that you could say they speak for the Sikh nation. And to use the word Khalistan and Sikh community interchangeably, I think that's unfair as well.
Can I just
Yes, please.
draw both of the previous comments into one? I think Shamsher's arguments are really interesting and nuanced. They're kind of arguments from a philosophical angle, and they're arguments that in university lecture theatres we can certainly have and debate, but in the kind of media there's not a lot of traction for that kind of stuff. Not because it's not important, but because particularly if you go to like Five Live or Asian Network, they want extreme arguments. They want position people give you a soundbite, and that's why they never asked me to appear on that, because I'll give a nuanced argument, and they don't like that because they lose audience. So that's the problem with the radio. The TV also, to some extent, the Sikh media has a kind of its own bias, and they only have people there who will put their, and it's often associated with Jathebandis. So we are really kind of all the platforms are a bit kind of challenging for us at the moment. But I think what we do need to do is ultimately the case for Khalistan will be made through nuanced arguments, through reasoned arguments, through evidence arguments. And so in a sense, this work is really important. We've got to find ways of bringing that work forward. And I'm trying to do that. One of my problems is that when we bring two people who bring an intellectual argument, is that they end up fighting, or some people can end up accusing them of being against a cause. And I think that's the other problem, that we haven't, in a sense, developed our own tolerance, I think. How do we develop a common position through kind of debating and arguing? At the moment,
let's try and stay on the topic of fairness, because we're going to come to that in a moment. For the audience, if anyone does have any comments or questions at any point, please just raise your hand.
My name is Dr Gurnam Singh. I think that the panel is telling Khalistan, talking about Khalistan in a very binary way. It's there's this Sikh country that we're going to have for ourselves, or we're not, and that doesn't seem very achievable in the medium to long term. But for me, Khalistan is also a mindset. It's a movement, and I think that's what's getting ignored, and that's what directly to Amardeep actually is not getting reported fairly. So Khalistan for me is the mindset that actually the Punjab police are not going to be able to pick up someone from this country like Jaggi and hold him without charge. It's that a politician like Jagdish Tatla is not going to be able to sit and be recorded and talk about killing hundreds of Sardars. It's it's a viewpoint that the government of Punjab are not going to be able to continue to strangle the state and have anti-Sikh politics, and is that getting reported fairly? Because if it is, I'm not seeing it.
I agree with in that Khalistan does not necessarily have to mean a nation state. There are stateless nations around. There are a lot of stateless nations around. A group of people who call themselves a nation, but they don't have a state. So I agree with you in that respect that Khalistan has different aspects to it. It's not just about the land. There is a mindset, the Khalsa mindset, the Sikh mindset, and some might say that would translate as Sikhi being a universe, not just restricted to a little part of Punjab, but the universe. To get really philosophical about it.
We'll have from.
But like I said, these are more nuanced and more.
No, but you spoke about this Jaggi thing as an opportunity. Is it not the media's duty to report the facts?
It's not the media's duty to do anything.
And then the media's ultimately
the media isn't a tool for people to shape and use. The media it is there to be. It is the job of the Khalistan movement to educate and inform the media. It is not necessarily the media's job to court the Khalistan.
So we've got 4 more questions to go through. So we'll do 2 more comments from the audience, and then we'll go to the next question.
I think I just want to touch on the point, especially if you see in the media. I'll agree that there's a big bias. The Telugu media, they're very chalak, that they know what the Khalistan movement is, but they present it very biasly. I'll just share an example with you. I shared there was a photo going on over Twitter. I'll mention the name of the journalist from Hindustan Times. His name is Ravinder Vasudeva. Yeah, so please.
I think he's a senior editor, if I remember correctly.
So it's very interesting the way he labeled. I will tell you the headline. So there was Daily Tarka from Daily Mail in India, and the other one was Hindustan Times. So the Daily Mail goes, Punjabi Tarka, gun culture fuels, illegal arms trade. And the same news was reported by Hindustan Times journalist, and he said, new brand of Sikh militancy, tech-savvy, pro-Khalistan youth radicalized on social media. So I think it's just as Sikhs, as a young Sikh, I think they're buying into the narrative of the West. Oh, the people are being getting radicalized on social media. But as Shamsher said before, and Apaji, I just want to say, like, Khalistan, it's a proper movement. It was declared by Sabbat Khalsa, by Khalsa. So we shouldn't have we shouldn't say only one person can represent that views or etc. So I believe there's a big bias in it, and people need to get exactly like up to the standards.
Hi. So I just want to make comments about the earlier part of your speech. You said that the Khalistan's strategy to sell itself basically to the international media and international audiences, I mean, they have to reform it. Well, I'm not really knowledgeable on the issue, but I can draw lines to another cause which face the same problems, and it's up against a vast itinerary of media. That's the Kurdish cause. But they've actually, I mean, they've done a brilliant job of, you know, fighting off the Turkish, the Arab, and the Iranian media itinerary. I usually go to the parliaments, and I see the events being covered by the media. And as far as, I mean, is there something that the Khalistan movement can learn from the Kurdish movement? Because it's been such a successful movement, and I mean, as far as the media is concerned, at the end of the day, these are private corporations. They want to show us what attracts more international audience, and I've rarely seen media covering tensions. They cover it when they boil up to their flashpoints. Yeah,
thank you. We'll move on to the next question now. So that actually brings up the point that was mentioned by our previous commentator, who mentioned that the West can have an influence on depictions of Khalistan. Our question is actually, how much of an influence does the Indian state, so the Indian government, have on media depictions of the Khalistan movement? Again, how much influence does the Indian state have on media depictions of the Khalistan movement? And if we could relate this to how Khalistan is often portrayed in Western media. And we'll start with Dr Jasjit Singh, who's obviously done a recent research project, as mentioned earlier. So in your opinion, when you were doing your research, how much influence does the state have on how perhaps other media or Western media have on the perception of Khalistan?
I mean, it was media depictions in Indian media which actually started my project off, which got me to produce my report. Especially around the alleged dossier that was going to be presented to Narendra Modi when he visited in 2015. A whole host of allegations in Indian media. There were TV programs produced as well.
Could we also expand on that point about the dossier?
The dossier, which then in Parliament was denied on 2 occasions in British Parliament.
Just to explain, so in 2015 November, the Daily Mail ran an article which stated that a dossier was being handed over by Narendra Modi to David Cameron about so-called terror camps of Khalistanis being run in the UK. The Sikh Council UK, through their research, received clarification directly from Parliament that no such dossier existed. The Sikh Press Association complained about the article in the Daily Mail. The Independent Press Standards Organisation actually rejected that complaint. That was because the article was just a copy of an article which is directly from India. So therefore, in their perception, the complaint would have to be taken up with the article in India. Sorry, if you want to.
No, it's fine, because I mean, the allegations included, members of Khalistan organisations are planning to hold radicalisation training classes. They named particular gurdwaras in Smethwick and Glasgow. So yeah, it was a whole host of allegations, and that was the point, as to what was the truth in these. And the point also is that you can still find these videos online now. So it's not as if these allegations have actually gone away. So doing the report, I tried to look at how representations of Sikhs had changed over the years, and which particular contexts had led to the terms extremism, fundamentalism, radical to emerge. There has been some work done on Indian media, particularly by Professor Gurnam Singh at Oxford Brookes, who actually looked at the role of All India Radio and Doordarshan in the immediate aftermath of the events of 1984. And he's done really well in a book called Embedded Journalism, Punjab, by Jasmine Singh Sidhu. You can Google that, it is online. He's basically looked at the role of the media, and he explains how in an illiterate society, the TV and radio play a very important role, obviously, because that's how people get hold of their news. And the kinds of rhetoric that were being produced by the state media could actually were disproven in a number of cases. And as Vijay said, the way the media is working at the moment, particularly in the online environment, if the story comes out in a particular media headline appears on Google, it's not as if journalists can make a distinction between headlines from particular countries. They all have the same sort of, you know, level, if that makes sense. So it appears that given the online environment now, headlines from Indian media are actually probably being used more, and with syndication in the Daily Mail, for instance, would have more of an impact on countries outside India. So you see state organisations using terms like Sikh radicalisation, Sikh extremism, primarily I'd argue as a consequence of these terms being normalised in media headlines.
So that would be a strong influence then,
yeah,
we presume.
Yeah,
so,
in one word, yeah, strong influence.
So Amardeep, please do let me know if you feel there's too many questions being fired at you, but as the journalist on the table, we'll go to you next. If you were, say, tomorrow to receive a press release from either an Indian journalist or another media organisation which ran a story about Khalistan, and you got the go-ahead from your editor to go ahead and run with that story, is that something that you feel kind of you would be justified to do, or would you feel that kind of there would be a need to do more research into the piece and clarify with the Sikh organisations or Sikh community?
Yeah, I mean that's a given. As a journalist, you don't just copy and paste what somebody else has written. You take that as a starting point, and if there's something in there that's got a UK thread, you know, you've got to remember, you've got to distinguish when we're talking about the Indian
I
press.
know you can't speak on the behalf of the Independent Press Standards Organisation, but just your opinion, why do you think they would reject a complaint about them doing exactly, about a Western media organisation, the Daily Mail, doing exactly what you just said, literally copying and pasting an article and putting it on a English website?
I said, I wouldn't necessarily say that Daily Mail has the best journalistic capacity. It is the most complained about newspaper in the world ever.
But the Independent Press Standards Organisation, who's meant to be policing these media outlets, why do you think they perhaps would reject any complaints about such an article? Just in your opinion, of course, because you can't speak on their behalf.
I'd need to know more details about the case, but I can't believe that would be the case. That is not a defence to say, well, we cut and pasted it, go and find the original. You know, you've got to take responsibility. It was in your paper, so I don't think that's true. I don't think.
Well, we'd be happy to clarify.
I'd like to know more details about it. But as far as the actual question,
on Twitter,
the actual question about the Indian state and how much influence do they have? They have some influence. I mean, every state has some influence on its press, even this country, and the general influence is one of nationalism and patriotism. So you'll find all the papers across the spectrum, whether they're right-wing, left-wing, when it comes to the integrity of the UK and its borders, they will all sing from the same hymn sheet. So you should expect that from every other sovereign government. No Indian state or Indian media is going to talk up the fragmentation and breakup of India. It's kind of almost common sense, I'd say. They will certainly, or they certainly should, and this is where you can pick fault with them, they should have a balanced an accurate description of all sides. They are lacking in that, definitely. But, you know, and some of it does turn into pure jingoism, you know, it's proper shouting out. There might as well be an arm of the Hindu wing. But the bottom line is the Indian state still, you know, I mean, I did a bit of research on this myself. I found that quite a few of the newspapers and big media houses, which not just own newspapers, they also have websites and blogs and whatever, either have very close links with the Congress Party, as in ex-MPs own some of these media houses, and then on the extreme other side you've got the Communist Party having a major share in New Delhi TV, and they are completely against the BJP and the fight. So they're not all singing from the same hymn sheets. I mean, there is, on paper, India is supposed to be the biggest democracy in the world, and on paper they do tick some of the boxes for that. They have an open and free press, as much as it, you know, as much as we know it's free. I mean, it's not free in any country.
Can I just come in there? I think that there's some good points there. You know, the Indian media isn't a monolith.
Yeah.
Ironically, actually, one of the most staunchly independent Indian newspapers, and I think it's one of the oldest, is the Hindu.
Yeah.
I say ironical because, in a sense, you might think that that's a kind of Hindutva. But actually regularly puts out stories against Modi.
Yeah, it's got very socialist.
It's a very socialist, and that's partly because it's based in Chennai, in South India. And you do find that the press that comes out of the kind of central Hindi belt has a totally different outlook to the kind of press that comes out from West Bengal. So I don't think we should see the Indian media as a monolith. I think the other thing is, again, I don't think the conspiracy theories are that you've got, I mean, in India can't organise much. You've seen how they organised the Asian Games. It was a disaster. So I won't give them the kind of credibility that they can conspire. I think that it's patronage. I think that what you get is, you know, it's a conflagration of business, gangsters, MPs, and we have that nexus.
Sounds like a conspiracy.
That does.
Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy because it happens across the world, but there is a nexus there. And of course, for them to have access to media is the way to, you know, kind of put their own kind of people in a positive light. So I think it's more to do with that than any political conspiracy.
Just one final point. It's one of the things that, one of the strategies of the Khalistan movement should be to negate the Indian press by, one example, if the Indian press follow up, a hell of a lot of the stories that go into the Indian press are follow-ups from international press. They don't develop their own stories, they don't go out and find their own stories, they just hoover up what's going on around the world and put it in their newspaper. Now, if there was to be a pro or a sympathetic Khalistani article that went in the Western press, they will just reprint it in its entirety in the Indian press. And so maybe the Khalistan movement should concentrate more, like I said, on courting the international press, so that the Indian press are forced to follow suit.
There is a good example. If you look at the Sikh Federation UK, they've been courting the Hindustan Times, so they regularly get their articles and their press releases printed verbatim in the Hindustan Times. So, you know, I think there are these kind of possibilities. Yeah.
I think specifically on like media depictions of the Khalistan movement, not general kind of depictions of Sikhi or like, you know, articles related to the Sikh community or the diaspora. I'll give you guys an example from the Times of India in June 1984. Terrorists made a desperate attempt to blow up the Akaal Channel, killed a number of men, women and children, and unsuccessfully tried to escape with huge amounts of cash, jewellery and other valuables. After their leaders were killed in the action on June 5th, the Akaal Channel was not damaged in the army action. And that's the Indian newspaper. The Indian government's official white paper on the June 1984 invasion of the Barside says that no women and children were harmed, and that's still the official position. So if we look at actually what's printed in the Indian media specifically about Khalistan, Khalistan is synonymous with terrorism, it's synonymous with militancy, it's synonymous with a backward, radical, a religious extremist type of Sikh. That's manufactured within the Indian media. I think the newspapers and the influence of the state, I think it's very naive to not think that the Indian government, as Amardeep clearly said, every government has an agenda to make sure that their line is carried in the media. And we know India is one of the worst countries in the world for journalistic freedoms according to press trusts. There is copy and paste journalism that exists and that's rampant. There's no like further depth into any of the journalism. I'll give you a quote from The Guardian on 8th of June that says, New Delhi has kept alive a crisis in Punjab to achieve 3 questionable objectives. This is The Guardian in June 1984. To oust the Akali-led coalition government, to prevent a legitimate settlement of Punjab's territorial and river water disputes with the centre, and to forge a psychological wedge between the Hindus and the Sikhs. And this is The Guardian in June 8th, when you could argue that perhaps the standard of journalism, especially on reporting on something that was happening at that time, was a lot higher. Now The Guardian, like every other newspaper, literally copy and paste that same line. The Blue Star happened to flush out terrorists from the Darbar side. So the standard across the board has dwindled, and it's because of Orientalization. And again, it's about colonialism and coloniality and modernity. It's about looking at us as the other, that we don't have a legitimate opinion our voice has to be translated, and it has to be presented in the world stage for it to be considered legitimate and credible. Santji has to be translated into English, Sikhi has to be translated into English. The media comments and does analysis from the outside, from the periphery, and the voices inside the community are depicted as subjective because religion is this private thing. Till this day, the British media doesn't know how to speak about something else, and he's described as a religious leader or something. They don't know how to describe him as a statesman or as a political activist, right? There's no consideration. He's only relegated to the sphere of religion and religious radicalism, and it's because the Sikh community violates the religious secular binary that's existed. But like Dr Gurnam Singh said, these are going to get into like philosophical, theoretical arguments,
Which
and we
we'll
know
try
the
and stay
media
away from.
like simple arguments.
I think
Perhaps
I think
including
an
us.
important point to make though is that a lot of these narratives continue to exist, and once they're in the kind of, once they're out there. So, for instance, the idea that there was a brothel in the Barsal, for instance, that was reported in Indian media and then disproven. But the point is that the narrative exists no matter what, even though it was disproven later on. It happens today as well. When news gets out, it's out there, even if it's later retracted. You see the same thing with the Sun and whatever. Even though it's been retracted, the idea still gets out there.
And you
some
know
of these
what's really
narratives still
interesting
exist.
as well? Why is it that especially during June, especially during that time, why the Indian media was questioning the character of these Sikhs, right? Like these religious radicals, and the media actually wanted to undermine their character from a Sikh point of view. So it shows that there was a clear agenda there, not just about undermining and not presenting any political narratives, but saying that these guys weren't even Sikh, that Shamsher Singh wasn't even a Sikh, that they were actually rapists and they had brothels inside the Akaal Channel. Then a lot of people actually still believe this till this day, that Shamsher Singh was some kind of rapist and he wasn't a sant and he was a really bad individual. And that's Sikhs, not like the wider world.
I just want to ask Jasmine Kaur here a question. So you were on the BBC Asian Network the other day, and you stated that you, growing up, you were taught that Khalistan, in your own words, was a dirty word, and now, as you've gotten older, you've found yourself affiliating with the Khalistan movement and openly declaring yourself as a Khalistani. Do you feel that was because here in the West we have more access to kind of unbiased media, even if it's just social media, from Sikh organizations, whereas in somewhere like India, the media depictions will be a lot more biased and perhaps even curtail kind of social media presence of Sikh organizations?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. When I was growing up, the only discussions regarding Khalistan I had were with my family or with any books that I could get hold of or anything like that. And the media information that I had access to was the information that was literally being given out influenced by the Indian media and stuff like that. And I grew up from the age of 11 or 12, whenever I heard about Santaji and stuff like that, I immediately used to think, I used to put him on the same pedestal as like Bin Laden and stuff like that, when it's nothing like that at all. And as I developed my own opinions, did my own research, whether it be academically, through political discourse, through my activism, through poetry, anything like that, any personal, political or professional field, I developed my own opinions on Khalistan, and I came to my own standing and my own viewpoint. And a major part of that was discussing it through social media, through like Twitter and Instagram. Facebook not so much, that's kind of irrelevant to my generation and whatever, it's more Twitter. You're able to engage with people from across the world and hold interesting and intellectual dialogue regarding the Khalistan movement and anything about it. Whereas maybe a girl my age or younger in Punjab, well, not just girls, but the youth in Punjab, they don't have access to this type of thing because they're literally spoon-fed what the Indian state wants them to hear. They're brainwashed, and to some extent, well, not to some extent, to a major extent, it's far hard for them to discuss because they're on the ground in Punjab. Like in Punjab, it's like, there's statistics, I can't give it to you off the top of my head, but there's statistics right there that from people suffering from PTSD, from things that have happened in the 80s, like people are still scared to talk about it. So of course they don't want their children to hear about it. They don't want their children to get involved in things like this. So I think in the West, and in the diaspora in particular, we are lucky and we are blessed that we have groups and places like this to discuss it, and organisations such as NSYF, Akaal Publishers, Basics of Sikh and stuff like that. So yeah.
I mean, just to kind of further on that question then, from what you read in Indian state media, do you feel that kind of you do not fit the stereotypical view of a Khalistan supporter, being a young woman that you know, by all means and accounts, kind of fits in very nicely here in the West.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. When it comes to the Indian media and the image of a Khalistani that the Indian government portrays, it's I'd say it's of an Amritdhari Sikh man, probably a Dr Singh, and when you think of someone who openly declares themselves of a Khalistani, like you wouldn't think of a young academic or a young poet like myself sitting in the Sikh diaspora who's cut her hair, who wears makeup and stuff like that. Like you wouldn't, I would say that I myself do not fit the stereotypical image of a Khalistani at all.
We're going to move on to our third question, unless we have any questions from the audience. Again, at any point, do raise your hand. Yeah, Vijay. Just 1 second before we let your question get answered. I've just taken a couple of screenshots of our interactions with the Independent Press Standards Organisation in November 2015, where they rejected our complaint about that terror article. Sukhsodi, if you check. So we'll put that up on Twitter if anyone wants to see our interaction. Again, that is based on the Daily Mail publishing an article which said there was terror camps in the UK, Khalistani terror camps, that are based on a dossier that was allegedly handed by Modi to David Cameron. The Sikh Council found that that dossier didn't exist, confirmed by Parliament themselves. When we complained about the article based on that, it was rejected by the Independent Press Standards Organisation. So we can tweet you an example of those pictures when we interacted with them and they still rejected that complaint. Sorry, Riji, comment.
So, as Dr. Singh, so my question is primarily towards the two individuals who work with the media itself, because they themselves have both dropped terminologies such as, for example, Dr. Gurnam Singh used the term liberal, right? So that in itself showcases a problematic view, because then this term showcases the fact that you yourself are liberal, whereas what is the other then? Is the other something that contradicts this idea of liberal? Whereas the term liberal in itself does not exist within the context of the Khalistani movement, because this, as Shamsher Singh mentioned, this sphere of religion and politics within the Sikh sphere exist as one. They do not exist as one and the other. The other thing is, so taking that into account, we're all aware of the fact that the Indian media, for example, it's not a monolithic thing, but it does create state sensationalism. And not just Indian media, any media itself creates sensationalism. So then how can any individual, but actually my other point is the fact that this is actually primarily based off of English medium, right? So this event is based off of the fact that English medium and its relationship with the Khalistani movement. Because the Khalistani movement does exist, as it has existed since the onset of this movement in the 60s, 70s, 40s, so on and so forth before, within the Gurmukhi and the Punjabi medium of newspaper, books, conversations, whatever it may be. So the fact is that it's not a new experience. It's the fact that it hasn't been utilized by the Western individuals and by the Western newspaper or medium individuals who work with the media, right? And that's their feeling, because then they themselves have not really exposed themselves to the true narrative of the Khalistani movement. So my main thing is the fact that how can one expect a balanced story from the news itself if the newspaper is a medium of the state, whether that be printed media, radio, whatever it may be, and then it goes on into the sense of how do you center or how do you counteract your personal bias against the Khalistan narrative, as Dr. Gurnam Singh, you said the term.
When I used the liberal, I wasn't saying that I necessarily have that perspective. I was talking about the people who report and write about that, the media professionals.
No, but I've actually heard you use the terminology yourself in the past.
Let me answer that because it's an important question.
So going forward, so then how do you counteract your personal bias against the Khalistan narrative? Is it that the argument is strong enough in general, or is it that the argument is something that you are not capable of understanding, one? Or is it that the argument is something that you have not yet truly delved into outside of English?
There are two different questions there. One is about the way in which the media might interpret the Khalistan struggle, and let me offer you a different angle onto this. Yeah, most liberal-minded people, and I'm not saying that I'm a socialist, okay, so I'm not liberal in that sense, would see, say, theocratic states as problematic, yeah?
But the doctrine
Let me
itself, for example, like, I'm Khalistani, but I'm still considered
I think
myself
let
me
Gurnam
make the
speak.
point,
Let
yeah?
him speak.
So that they would see movements that are trying to create religious states as problematic, okay? That's their default position. By definition, liberal, they would be in favour of liberal democracies. And so it may well be that we've misrepresented the Khalistan struggle. It's being misrepresented as a theocratic struggle. But that's certainly one of the interpretations, and hence the comparison with Taliban or with ISIS, although they're kind of extremists, but also you could say with Iranian or even Pakistan to some extent. Now, you know, it goes back to the kind of some of the comments that Man and others have made. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, the ideology of Khalis is something that we can put across and say, this you know, contradicts these kind of fears and views. But in the next question, I will make another point linked to that, about divisions within the community.
Well, let's go to another comment from the audience. So we've got VG right back.
Can I just say one other thing? If you look at, say, the Israelis, a good example. I think that Israelis are a terrorist state, okay? I believe that they are committing all kinds of violence against Palestinians. But if you ever see Israeli spokespeople in the media, they are very powerful at using reason, rationality, logic, and all of those, and they often defeat the people who are trying to challenge their policies. So I'm not saying that we emulate them, but they know how to use the media. They're very skillful.
That's really interesting comment, because one of the responses we got from our questionnaire, which we sent out to media professionals prior to this event, in regards to terminology around the Khalistan movement and the Sikh movements in general, it actually stated that they felt using the word genocide to describe what happened in 1984, so calling that Sikh genocide, they said that was insensitive to the Jewish community. So just to repeat, a media professional said to the Sikh Press Association, calling what happened in 1984 a Sikh genocide is insensitive to the Jewish community. So that does kind of further your point about the way often Jewish topics are portrayed in the media. We're going to move on to our third question now. So our third question is, has internal conflict within the Sikh community made the topic of Khalistan difficult to cover for media? Again, has internal conflict within the Sikh community made the topic of Khalistan difficult to cover for media? Now, Dr Gurnam Singh, I'll start with yourself. You've touched upon this quite a few times already. How do you think your own experiences translate to the media, who, let's just say you've got your average journalist from The Independent, for example? How do you think they would find the difficulties you faced in terms of getting a position on Khalistan from someone?
Well, I mean, it is a big challenge. I mean, let's take somebody who writes a lot about Sikh issues, Sunny Hundal, yeah? Mm-hmm. And I regularly kind of have dialogue with Sunny. You know, he's always open to a dialogue. But if we can't convince Sunny Hundal to, you know, offer more of a pro-Sikh perspective, then, you know, we've got a lot of work to do. And he's, you know, from within our community, although others might argue that he's kind of got a different perspective. But I just want to give 3 concrete examples. Absolutely, divisions within our community have had a damaging effect. Now, I'll give you 3 concrete examples. If we go back to 2014, when we're commemorating the 30th anniversary of the attack on the Bassey. And if you remember, up to that point, the movement, certainly in the UK, to some extent, was waning. And that was evidenced in the fact that the 1984 demonstration that they have out in Hyde Park was, you know, diminishing dramatically. But we had the media, we promoted that big time, and we had 30,000 plus people in the Hyde Park demonstration, which was a powerful kind of demonstration that the Sikhs are still fighting for the cause. But what happened at the same time at the Akaal Channel on the 30th anniversary? We had Sikhs fighting Sikhs, sword wielding, fighting, and those images were all over the media. And even I was ashamed to see that image. And you can have all kind of conspiracy theories about maybe it was the Indian government or Badal or whatever, but the spectacle of having Sikhs on the 30th anniversary fighting Sikhs did immense damage, and that was seen as Now, if we, that same year, I actually did a debate in the Birmingham Town Hall, and we had all the Khalistani Jathebandis there, and we debated Khalistan. And a question was put, is Khalistan, and I know that you don't like this terminology, is it a secular state in the sense that, because often Maharaja Ranjit Singh is invoked as a secular ruler, and somehow that Sikh Raj is a starting point to define our own Raj? Or is it a theocratic state? Will it be Amritdhari Sikhs who will run this state? Will it only be Amritdharis who can actually have power and governance? Or can anybody, in fact the question was, could a Hindu become a Prime Minister of Khalistan?
And those are questions we're not going to try and answer now.
But I want to tell you the response.
Yeah.
So half the Khalistanis in the room said no, and half of them said yes. And then there was a huge row about that. So what I'm saying is that we have divisions in terms of how we conceptualize this, and maybe that they could be healthy, but we tend not to debate them. We have divisions on the ground. One last example, when Mr. Modi came to this country, Sikhs were falling over each other to meet him. In fact, the only person who refused to have at that meeting was me. They put my name forward and said, no, we're not going to have him. So I feel proud that I wasn't invited to that meeting. Yet there was the dossier at the same time. So you had a dossier at the moment. And, Gurnam Singh, Secretary General of the Sikh Council UK was there. And he praised Modi for his speech at Wembley Stadium, where Modi talked about the great Sikhs and things like that. So, we have these differences in our community, and often that does create a lot of kind of damage to the kind of...
I just want to bring that question to Jasmine then. Do you perhaps feel that with there being this internal conflict that a lot of people kind of have experienced, do you feel this is easier for media to focus on rather than the issue itself, given your experiences of reading news on Khalistan and also your own recent experience being on the Asian network? So is it easier for media to focus on that internal conflict rather than the issue itself?
Yeah, I definitely agree with your statement that the media kind of focus on the internal conflict and the emotional side that the whole Khalistan subject creates within the Sikh community, and instead of focusing upon Khalistan itself, and then they nitpick and then they just report on, that's their catalyst for creating even more negative bias regarding Khalistan in the media. And on Friday I had the unpleasant experience of dealing with good old Nahal again.
Although I will add a caveat, the BBC Asia Network are one of the few organisations that do allow this topic to be discussed in a public sphere, and they have a relationship with the Sikh Press Association that is very interactive, and they are interested, for whatever reasons, you guys can make your own assumptions about that, but they are very interested in covering Sikh topics regularly, which the Sikh Press Association, I have to say, we're grateful for, because we don't have a platform of that scale anywhere else. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, like I said, interacting with Nahal, he is one of those type of journalists that the whole object of appearing on that radio interview was to talk about this event and media coverage of Khalistan itself. But then he began talking about like divides within the Sikh community and like philosophical questions and ideological questions and things like that. And I feel like when journalists and the media delve into something like that, they're just trying to provoke a reaction to satisfy, I don't know, readership and things like that, and I think that's quite disgusting.
I'm going to bring up two comments we got on a question we had in our questionnaire from the media professionals that answered back before looking for Dr Jasjit Singh to give me some input on this. One of these was that the question, was are Khalistanis presenting their views to the media in an articulate and open fashion? 46% said no, so 13% said sometimes. But comments we got on this specifically said, one, that Khalistanis can often be hot-headed and biased. But on the opposite end of the scale, we also had a comment from a journalist saying that most Sikhs are simply afraid to touch the topic. So on both ends of the spectrum, there seems to be some sort of issue. Dr. Jasjit Singh, in your kind of view, what would you think? How do Sikhs need to find a middle ground, and if they need to, how do they do so?
I think firstly Sikhs need to be a lot more forgiving regarding their representatives. It's an added pressure as a minority representing a whole community on national radio, which a majority person wouldn't have. And I've been asked by the BBC, you know, they've got my number now, I've been asked to supply Sikhs to them in various kind of categories. And a lot of people aren't willing to come on because they know that if they say something wrong, then somebody will jump down their throat. You know, we're not all experts. Everyone's at different. That's the point, isn't it? We're all at different levels. So, you know, if somebody's brave enough to go out there and give it a go, then fair enough. You can talk about what you liked or didn't like about what they said offline later on. That's all good. But, you know, the way I see it, there's not many of us anyway. So if somebody's brave enough to go out there, then we need to kind of, you know, with obviously, you know, don't say anything and everything. We're all experienced enough to have seen really bad interviews, of course. So I'm not saying that anybody should jump on, but, you know, for those that know a little bit what they're talking about, maybe be a bit more forgiving.
Regarding the comments, so hot-headed and biased.
See, a lot of that, again, where do those perceptions come from? And I'd suggest it goes back to question number 2, and some of the photographs that are often used when certain, you know, events take place, when certain protests take place. Wasn't there an article on the BBC about one guy who's in every single you know what I mean? There's one guy who's in every single.
Perhaps
protest.
Something interesting for the audience to do would actually be maybe Google Khalistani and look at the images that come up and make up for your own mind how the portrayal in general. But the other comment then, so most Sikhs are afraid to touch the topic, Dr. Jasjit Singh. In your opinion, what do you think about that?
Again, it goes back to what I said. It's because do we allow people to express their opinion? Yeah, I mean they can do, but I know people who've told me about kickbacks on things they've said before. So let it get out in the open. Let people express their opinion and deal with the argument, not the individual.
Shamsher Singh, has an aggressive stance on Khalistan pushed away larger community support based on that the thought that most Sikhs are afraid to touch the topic?
I don't think. I think firstly, a community that's gone through genocide and has lived through the state suppression and state terror. Jayaji writes in his book, The Politics of Genocide, that between 1984 and 1995, 1 million Sikh youth went missing or were killed. This has been well documented by human rights organizations. So the amount of state terror that we were subjected to as a community, it's understandable that there's apprehension when engaging with authorities or speaking about these kind of issues. I think we've internalized a lot of that fear, coming as a second generation Khalistani, a parent who was involved in the Khalistan Sangharsh, who was part of an ex-militant for Jathebandi. I think there's an internalization of that fear of state terror, that we don't want to speak openly about Khalistan because we'll be labeled as terrorists and as extremists, and we don't have the ability to kind of articulate a position in response to that. There's a lot of kind of talk here about being rational and being well-reasoned and being logical and kind of stepping into this constructed arena of like modernity and English as a language and being able to present our argument without any emotion. And I think that's completely unfair, completely unrealistic. I think as a community there is, but our language, Punjabi is an incredibly emotional language. When we speak in Punjabi, the expression, the mode of expression is completely different. And when we're forced to have a conversation in English, I think it's unnecessary conditions are imposed. Like as an individual, I'm supposed to not feel any pain or anger or rage that my voice, our community's voice, has been silenced through state terror, and I think it's indicative of the whole kind of setup. There's a shifting outside of Sikhi, outside of Gurmat, where Sant Jarnail Singh and Sikhs were, our Jathebandiyan are, where the Khalistan Sangharsh exists, with a closeness to Guru Granth, to Guru Panth, to Sikhi, and there's a shifting away from that. And how does that shifting occur? Authority and social organization is being located outside of Guru Granth Sahib, where we call Guru Granth Sahib Sache Badshah, is a political, religious. All of our kind of definition of being comes from there. And when we go into the modern quote-unquote world, authority is now coming from the state, it's coming from the media. Why does the media want us to be rational? Why does the media, if we're really well behaved, this is what I hear when the media says stuff, when I hear stuff like that, if we're really well behaved, then maybe we'll be given an opportunity to kind of speak on this. I think it's deeply insulting, and I think when media kind of talks about this, I mean, we are very rational and we're very logical, and I think there is a lot of anger in the community, and I think the question is, why does that anger exist? Because the last time we saw that kind of anger, an entire generation of Sikhs from Punjab picked up weapons in order to fight against a country they no longer saw as their own. So what does that anger lead to, and why is that anger existing, and why is it that, you know, we're so passionate about this, and why is it that our voice isn't being heard, and why are we forced to speak along you know, constructed terms and to kind of contort and fit in? Like, if I wear a suit, will I be more like you know, seen as a nicer person? If I wear a triangle turban, if I, like, you know, put a suit and tie on it, will I be seen as more rational, as more liberal, as more intelligent, as more articulate? If I wear a t-shirt with Khalistan Zindabad on there, am I immediately perceived as irrational religious extremist? And I think those questions need to be asked to the media.
Yeah, I'll go to you in just 1 second, but I just want to be slightly more specific then. But do you think there's a job to be done then from Khalistani supporters to bring more Sikhs into the topic, given that we've got comments such as most Sikhs are afraid to touch the topic?
I think there needs to be more understanding of a movement before any critique or any conversation takes place around it, and I'm really glad that this event isn't about talking about Khalistan, even though some of the panelists have made a lot of commentary about Sikhi, about theocracy, about socialism, about liberalism and all the rest of it. I think we need to fully understand a movement, a liberation movement of a people. We need to understand the lived realities of those people that exist today. This is a living movement, a living, breathing Sangharsh. And we need to be sympathetic to the environment within which such aggressive, militant and extremist response occurs against state violence and state terror. I think we need to understand movements before we assume to critique them.
I 100%.
Amardeep, sorry.
Just on this whole, again, it's going, this repeated narrative of us and them, as if the media is an enemy to be overcome.
It is though, I'm afraid.
Well, that's another point, but
I agree with you on that.
Yeah,
there is some of that
perception
of us and
but
them.
when you talk about, well, you know, if the media don't understand us, then I'm just going to turn my back on the media. I find that slightly immature in that, well, you know, it's my ball, I'm going to take it away if you don't play my rules, kind of thing. It's for you.
I think that's a simplistic way of the
be
argument, though. I haven't heard that said on this table yet.
Well, in a manner of speaking, it's kind of, you know, you've kind of alluded to the fact that, well, I don't fit into that model, therefore I'm going to turn my back on it.
But I'm still here on the panel speaking.
Yeah, which is very good, which is excellent, which is, you know, that is the way it should be.
I think what Shamsher is trying to say is he's not going to like mould himself into something that he isn't in order for the media to try and understand him.
That's where the professionality and understanding the media comes in. It's for you to act smart and play by the media's games.
It's also the media's job. If
you want
want
something
to be
from the media.
Yes.
So you're in a position where you're asking for something. It's not the media asking you for something.
No,
you're
but if the
asking
media want to be professional and do their jobs, they need to also put in the effort and research themselves as well.
Which they will, but you can't be turning your back because you don't like the rules.
So we don't want to keep
back and
forth. We don't want to keep.
Really briefly on the kind of arena that we exist in. It's this modern liberal secular democratic arena. It's capitalist that exists within the industrialized world, and order is established as the highest order, and that's our proximity as Sikhs to Christianity. And when we interpret it, it's as the lenses, or how close are we to whiteness, how close are we to Christianity. When Sikhis talked about, well, how is it understood with Christianity as the apex? When we're talking about Khalistan as a nation, the European nations are the apex, and when we're talking about that, well, how close are we to those? So when we're talking about conforming, this arena is violent to all of the global south, not just to Sikhs, to anybody that is black and brown, that anybody that isn't white. We have to always fight for our expression in this arena.
There is a problem with this. There is a problem with this argument. You can't then make the argument that the whole world doesn't understand you because
I'm not saying that.
Because it's English and this, that, and the other.
I'm not saying that.
And then fight for a nation state, which is a very modern concept. Unless we've got a different concept of what a nation state is.
Let's wait 1 second. Sorry, I just want to bring it together and go back to Amardeep Bassey. So, is there a way that media would be more open perhaps, and I don't want to just put it on that they're not already more open. So this is just playing scenarios, just 1 second, for someone that might actually be open in their belief that I believe that the AK-47 symbolism, for example, which has been kind of heavily criticized in public affairs, that they could be open about saying, this is my symbol of my support for Khalistan. Do you think that media could ever adapt to relate to that in a friendly and open way as well?
Like I said earlier, there's a real myth around the media as it's this dark machine that spins its own webs, and we've got to be fearful of it. It's not quite the case. As journalists, we are human beings. It's not my job as a journalist to know everything, but it's my job as a journalist to know where to find out everything. I need to have these sources of information. Now, you can run the narrative here. It's not very complicated. You pick a journalist. That's one thing in itself. If you wanted a story of Khalistan, who would you go to? The political reporter, the religious reporter, the education reporter?
We will actually be publishing those details and on our questionnaire as well. So we did ask that question.
Those are the kind of basics you need to. It's simply you talk to him. It's a two-way conversation. There's no wicked journalist out there saying, I can't wait to trip this guy up. For a journalist, he is looking for a story. That's his bread and butter. That's how he gets promotion. That's how he gets paid. He's just looking for stories. He doesn't invest any emotion in it. He won't give two hoots whether you make Khalistan or not. His job is to present the argument.
Would you respond to like Noam Chomsky when he kind of says that corporate media exists to further the agenda and the interests of dominant so-called elite groups?
I'm a big fan of Noam Chomsky, and in a wider sense, he is right. I agree with that. Media is controlled, state controlled, there is an agenda. But on a day-to-day basis of journalist, human being, subject and interviewer, there is leeway for that bigger bias to be bypassed. The editor isn't going to nitpick on everything that's in the general theme of the newspaper. Yes, there will be an editorial bias which is state controlled to a certain extent.
Every time I've had a conversation with a journalist, every time I've kind of had a conversation, the response that we used to get as an organisation or as an individual I used to get was, well, you're kind of passionate and you're kind of angry. And then the more I kind of read and the more I kind of developed myself, it was, well, it's beyond the scope of what we're trying to cover. It's too complex. We have a 5-minute segment or a 2-minute segment, and you have to kind of fit your entire expression within a sentence. Is that doable? Like a bullet point? Like
that is a skill. That is where the Sikh community or the Khalistan movement need to invest in a bit of professionality there. Play the game. It is a game.
Okay.
And you're the ones.
We're gonna. On this question, we're going to take a couple of comments from the audience. I know Vijay's been waiting for a very long time. No, here, right at the front. And then we're going to go on to our next question.
Hi, my name is Dr Singh. I think we're talking about media, where media plays a very crucial role. So I'm going to talk about 2 incidents over here. 2014, 3rd anniversary of the 1984. That incident happened about 9:30 to 10 o'clock in the morning in India. I think
we're talking about the Amritsar.
6 o'clock the BBC covered that news over here. I was working in Terminal 5, so as soon as I opened my system, BBC, militant fight against, separatists fight against the Sikh hardliners. That was the news line. So they covered that. 2015, sacrilege of Dr Gurnam Singh Maharaj all over Punjab. Continuously happened for nearly about 6 months. 2 Sikhs got shot dead as well. And the Sikhs went to protest in London. So one of the guy who was leading the protest, he said to the police, all we want is the media to cover 10 minutes so that we can tell the world what's happening in Punjab right now. The media didn't care. So what happened, the boys, what they did was they blocked the road. I don't know if it was a good decision, right decision or bad decision. The moment they blocked the road, all the cameras came out. It was like a Bollywood movie going on. So I don't understand. So media obviously played, someone is suppressing the media to cover their voice.
I think that's a good example of what I was saying. The media just goes after the story. There is no...
Can we say a Mirch Masala story, or can we say a suppression story when you've been told to cover that story, or you've been told not to cover that story?
In my 25 years as a journalist practicing in the UK, I have never been told what to write and not what to write by an editor or anybody else. But that's the UK.
Nick, at the back.
Thank you.
Maybe I can shed light on this in 2 ways. I used to be a journalist for the BBC Asian Network, and I'm also now an ex-journalist. I work on the other side, and I teach people in corporate business environments about how to handle the media. So we can have a moralistic conversation about whether the media is good, bad, whatever it is. The media exists. you can't change the way the media is. You can try and influence it, which is what I think I've heard on some of the panels, but you can't change the ethos of the media. So when you said, I think the media is evil, the media, the people asking the questions will ask provocative questions, they'll ask provoking questions, some might be ignorant, some might not have all the knowledge that you require from the journalist, but remember, they Google know things. They've got a million other things that they've got to do in the day. It's not just the Khalistan story they've got to cover, they've got to cover so many other stories. So it's not just about you thinking that the media is, you know, evil, Nihal's evil. He's going to ask you those questions because those are the questions that other people are asking on Twitter, whatever, wherever. It's up to you to be able to handle that. And that's what I teach, in the sense that, you know, your 5-minute soundbite, your 3-minute soundbite, so let's articulate what you're going to say in that 2-3 minutes that you're in front of the media. What possibly can you say about Khalistan in 15-second soundbite? How are you going to get that across? So that's what we mean by strategy. You teach a strategy for that environment, for that mode of communication, whatever it is. Here you've got more time to articulate it. In the media, it is going to be sometimes a 15-second soundbite or a little quote or whatever. What are you going to say in that quote to get your message across? And that's what we mean by strategy and understanding the media. Look at Jeremy Paxman. Look at the questions he asks politicians. Are you going to get personally offended by it, or are you going to answer it in a more, in a way that you think you'll get your message across? If you take it personally, it's great for the media because we love a good argument on air, because it sells newspapers and it gets you viral and it does all that stuff. So that's when we say, know what you're getting yourself into and know how you're going to handle it when you're in front of the media.
So let's take one more comment from the audience, then we'll go to our next question. Did we have one more comment?
Can I ask a question?
No, I think we're going to need to move on to the next question just so we can fit everything. So last comment, very briefly, if you could, Bassey.
I think we are victims of chasing the narrative after it's already been set as a bump, as an organisation, as a community, whatever you want to call it. I think we need to come out of the mindset of rather following the narrative, is actually setting the narrative ourselves and allowing the media to come and chase us for that, the information that relates to that. I think too often it gets set somewhere else in a boardroom or in a, you know, whatever. And
but the original question, sorry, Bassey, just to get your opinion on that, was that has internal conflict made it too difficult for that to actually happen?
I think our strings have been pulled in such a way that we ourselves don't know who we're looking at and if that person is Sajjal or not, and we start questioning each other a lot in terms of people's motives. But I think we have to go back to basics, and I think Jagraj said it quite well in the video that was edited, you know, just after his passing, which was we need to go back to Guru, and we need to go back to Ikhtias, and we need to start from there and build back from there. If we don't go from there, we've got nothing to build from.
Can I just, one of the narratives...
No, sorry, we're going to go to the next question. Okay. We're going to try and fit in that.
Fine, yes.
Okay, so the fourth question of the evening. Does there need to be a push from Khalistani supporters to disassociate the movement with previous militancy? Again, does there need to be a push from Khalistani supporters to disassociate the movement with previous militancy? And I'll bring up some statistics in regards to this question being proposed to media professionals, but if you could hear from Shamsher Singh first on this topic.
I think if we look at this, the question of militancy, I think it goes back to the idea that as Sikhs we're this barbaric other, when the coordinates for this conversation are Europe and modernity, and when we look back towards like militancy, it's barbaric violence that exists outside of the scope of like what's legitimate. I think it's not on myself as a Khalistani. I wasn't born during the militancy. I was a child during that period. I don't see why I have a responsibility to distance myself from something that I wasn't around at, and I think it's an unfair expectation. And regarding on the question that's always kind of asked by the media, is it justifiable for Sikhs to pick up arms? They always ask this question. It's, they want like that kind of provocative kind of response to it, that we can pick up weapons and the rest of it. It's something that the Khalsa Panth has done since its inception to be Shastartari. Since 1986, the Gurmate that were passed for the liberation of the Qawm, Sikhs believe in being Shastartari. Formal declarations were passed passed in 1986 for the Khalistan movement to pick up arms and to pursue as a Shastardhari people. We're not pacifists, so the context of that, so yes, it's perfectly okay for Sikhs to pick up arms, to pursue their freedom, but there are preconditions to this armed resistance. We're not irrational, erratic people, right? There's preconditions, and those are the arena for the Khalsa Panth as a sovereign entity to deliberate upon. So distancing ourselves, it hasn't really kind of worked in the past. If we look at the reports that were written during the 80s of state violence and state terror, like oppression in Punjab, that was written by a panel of judges which were arrested for sedition.
Can I add in one stat which just might help you kind of go further on that? 20% of those that answered our questionnaire said that they felt Khalistan cannot be separated from incidents such as the Air India bombing of 1985. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because you're saying that you feel you do not need to disassociate yourself with that movement, but 20% of the media we spoke with felt that it can't be separated.
I think like it's impossible to disassociate yourself from militancy when you don't have militancy. Like I live in Southall, I don't have like a militant faction of Khalistanis running around in Punjab. So I think it's really impossible to do that. But not much has changed. Like when the 80s, when reports were written, right, this was when the state violence and state terror was taking place, 86 to 95, oppression in Punjab, who are the guilty, Citizens Report for Democracy, and these were liberal progressive groups, right, in a modern secular India, and they still called the Sikhs during that time terrorists, militants and extremists, and the oppression in Punjab is one of the best reports that's written about state violence and terror, and they document cases of mass rape, they document cases of government terror. They actually call the government terrorists, and they say, there's one quote in there that says Amritaris are being specifically targeted, particularly Sikh men, and Amritaris are in danger, their future is uncertain, and it goes into the details of why we were being targeted. But even during the 80s, during that time, there was still this, that the Sikhs are terrorists. So no matter how hard we try, no matter how hard we say our Siddhant is Guru Granth Sahib, that's where we draw our inspiration from. So the question, separating yourself from militancy, is a loaded question. No matter how hard we try and say we're going to follow the Siddhant of Guru Granth Sahib, when Khalistan is established, it's going to be governed on the basis of the Siddhant, the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib, and the media is going to call us a theocracy. They're going to say, well, you need to disassociate yourself from religious violence and extremism. So I think the onus is, and again, I don't want to get into some of the points that Amardeep is raising are brilliant. I don't want to get into this us versus them with the media, but like Amardeep also says, there is an agenda by governments, and for us, how do we kind of draw the boundaries and say, well, we're not associated with militancy, but at the same time, we're a people that are armed and that do believe. Like this government, like democracy, if it was the be-all and end-all, Britain wouldn't have one of the most advanced militaries in the world. They wouldn't be selling weapons to Saudi Arabia so they can bomb children. So the idea that we somehow, when we're talking about our freedom, it has to be non-violent, it has to be rational, reasonable rhetoric that exists in the public sphere. Like, why are these conditions opposed upon us? We don't say to the British government, when you're going to talk about democracy, you should disarm yourselves nuclearly. We shouldn't have nuclear weapons in the world. That the British government should disband its military before they talk about democracy in the world. That the American government, which is one of the most imperialistic governments in the world, they should disband their military before they go and talk about to the rest of the world that we live in a democratic country. And India as well, as the world's kind of so-called largest democracy, has the fourth largest army. Kashmir is one of the largest heavily militarized areas in the world. They commit mass human rights violations and atrocities, yet no one says to them that you should disband your army before calling yourself a democratic nation. So I think it's a loaded question. I think it pushes us again into that sphere of when we're a religion, when we have our Quran and it's a ceremonial sword, then it's fine. But as soon as you step into the realm of politics and you talk about arming yourself for liberation, then you're religious extremists. So that religious secular binary doesn't exist for us, because it's miri piri. Our dharam goes into the public sphere, our public sphere goes into our private sphere. We're not these, dharam isn't just something that's private for us. So let
me bring that question to Dr Jasjit Singh. In your own research, of course, did you feel that there was underlying concern that Khalistani support could kind of take the shape of something which it did in the 80s and the 90s?
I mean, so as part of the research, I mapped all the incidents that had involved Sikhs going back to the colonial period, and certainly post Operation Blue Star, there were incidents of violence in Britain. There were, plots to assassinate Indian state officials. There were lots of intra-Sikh issues. And I suppose the point I make is that, I work in a religious studies department, and if you think about it, in terms of the trauma that still exists in the community, which we've talked about, and the fact that, because I'm often asked, could this ever happen again? Could the Sikhs start committing violence against each other to that degree that happened straight after Blue Star? And I thought, and the way I answer that, I say, how many occasions or instances do you know where a state attacks the most holiest shrine, using the religious terminology,
so I'd just like
of a community? Hang on, wait. And the only one I can think of, I've asked my colleagues, is the destruction of the Jewish temple by the Roman Empire in 70 AD,
wow.
Which is something that the Jewish community still talks about, and it's something by which they still define themselves with. So in terms of attacks on Dabrastan, I think there have been six or seven in total, but this was the one that was televised, revolution televised, so this is the one that kind of sticks in the memory. So what I say in terms of return to militancy is you have to understand the reason why that trauma occurred specifically after that event, and it would take an event of equal ferocity, I think, for that to happen again.
So again, it would take an event of equal ferocity for that to happen again. And two stats again from our questionnaire: 53% of those that responded to our questionnaire said they could maybe see an attack happening in the West from Khalistani supporters. 53%. So that is their own perception of kind of where the Khalistani movement lies. Jasmine, how do you respond to that thought that 53% of the journalists we spoke to believe that there is a danger? Somebody like yourselves, who self-admittedly is a Khalistani, could propose and be a danger, a threat to general society.
I'm not sure how to answer that. Could I be a threat to danger because I don't fit the traditional image of a Khalistani, and maybe I could go out there and unashamedly represent who I am and where I come from, what I believe in? Is that why I could be a perceived threat?
It was actually a specific question on do you believe there could be a terror attack in the West from a Khalistani supporter? And again, 53% answered maybe.
That makes sense to me.
Let's read this out.
That makes sense to me because Khalistanis are seen as, Khalistan and terrorism is synonymous within the media. So that does make sense from the kind of media's point of view.
It's relevant that we understand how many people responded, though, right?
Okay.
53%.
Yeah, exactly. Like we did say at the start, it was a very small sample. Do me a favour, don't shout out again. We'll pass the mic around. Sorry, VG, you were going to come in.
I was just going to say, I've concluded that there is no threat to the British state because of what I said before about the ferocity of the event. And despite the January 2014 revelations about possible British involvement in the lead up to Operation Blue Star, there's been no protest against the British government as a consequence. There's been no, anything against the British state per se. So I would challenge that argument, to be honest.
And kind of like as organisations that exist within our community that claim to be representative of Sikhs, they want to get further and closer to the establishment, to like whiteness, to the government. There's this whole push from Sikh organisations to be as part of the establishment. They're credentialised, they accept honours like OBEs, MBEs, Orders of the British Empire. So there's this kind of complete erasure of the colonial context that that allowed us to be here, and like modernity is kind of the precondition. Europe is the coordinates for any conversation to take place, and like it kind of be summed up by this attitude: I am here, and therefore we have arrived as a people. And there's no question of how did we arrive, what's the context of our arrival here. So I think Sikh organisations that represent us, they actually emulate whiteness and they want to be closer to the state. So I don't think that there's a threat, because as a community we pride ourselves on our integration, on our multiculturalism, on how good we are as British Sikhs, right? The whole idea of the good Sikh is someone who is an MP now, as someone who is a lawyer, someone who's credentialised by modernity and whiteness. So I think as a community there's no threat.
I think the only threat that Shamsher poses is threat by philosophy. Given that destroys through philosophical concepts, and there's a genuine threat that we lose the argument by always
talking about not being academic or theoretical. Should I write?
We're talking about the media here. Okay. We're talking about the media and about how we put our case across. But the point about militancy, I mean, it's a loaded term, isn't it? You know, the Indian government isn't militant, although they commit all kinds of genocide. So, you know, and one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. And as long as we're part of a subaltern, sorry, I'm slipping to Shamsher talk. As long as we're part of a group that's been oppressed, then we will always be fighting against the kind of construction of our resistance. But our Sikhi is very clear, you know, we have defensive Sangharsh, we've always had that. You know, we won't be Sikhs if we said that we will become pacifists. So no, you know, we are, and when you asked that question on Nihal's show, I think that you should have answered, you didn't answer the question, but you should have said, yes, we believe in self-defense. If somebody's going to kill me, then I have a human right to stand and fight, and we didn't. I speak not as somebody who's a commentator, I speak as somebody who actually was in Punjab in 1984 with Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala. So I knew the kinds of, and those people were not the kind of rabid Taliban types that they're coming. They were very gentle people, and they believed in the idea of the Anandpur Matan. One thing that's been lost in all of this debate today, and I want to bring us back to that debate, is that 84 was about the Anandpur Matan. The Khalistan issue comes afterwards, and conveniently we've lost that, and that was about reconstructing that colonial state or moving that colonial state to become a new kind of state, yeah? And we've lost that, and that was the biggest threat, I think, to that state. And convenient that's been. So I think that to some extent it's convenient for the Indian state to keep reproducing the narrative of Khalistan as a kind of militant separatist threat. I'm not saying that we should take their construction, we can reconstruct it for ourselves, but we also need to understand the politics that's being played here as well.
Just very briefly on that, I just want to make
Before we go to Amardeep Bassey,
I just want to make a point on that. Sant Jarnail Singh, as Dr Gurnam Singh was speaking about, Sant Jarnail Singh mobilized the Sikh community through shifting their focus back towards Gurmat, through Prachar, through Sikhi, through being Shastrtari, in order to assert our sovereignty and our resistance in the struggle to exercise our Padshahi. So not just being defensive, Khalsa Soe Malesh Se Jare, where Shastrtari as a Qawm, we reserve the right as a sovereign people, like Britain reserves the right as a sovereign nation to attack or to defend as so it sees fit, as serves it as a sovereign nation. So as Sikhs, we should have that same mentality that we have the ability to attack or defend as it serves us. And that has been demonstrated from Guru Har Gobind's time when they donned two Karpana of Miri Piri, when they provoked the Mughal Empire into open warfare, when they captured the Baj, the stories that we tell ourselves as children, the Sakhiyan that are told within the Sikh community. So there's both sides of that. We exert our sovereignty.
Let's go to Amardeep Bassey if it's
Jasjit in his report made a very interesting observation that for the British, when it's convenient for them, they will construct us as a military race. And when it's not convenient, they'll construct us as a terrorist people. So we need to know how these kind of hegemon, how these kind of dominant kind of groups do mobilize their own kind of ideas about the other, if you like.
So, Amardeep Bassey, in your opinion, as a media professional, as a journalist, does there need to be a push from Khalistani supporters to disassociate the movement with previous militancy?
I think the edge needs to be taken off it a little. Maybe the aggression might be taken off it, but like Shamsher was saying, we'd be doing Sikhism a disservice to say we have no militant edge. I mean, surely wasn't the whole Khalistan movement born out of violence? Wasn't Operation Blue Star violent? Wasn't the resistance violent?
Just a caveat, Dr Gurnam Singh there mentioned, I believe, the Anandpur Sahib resolution, which is something that perhaps I think more people should kind of look into in regards to where these movements started from in the modern context. But sorry, if you'd like.
So I think there's a danger that you can go too far the other way and try and portray Sikhism as being this pacifist religion, which it isn't. In fact, one of the USPs of Sikhism, certainly to the West, is this military nature, this saint soldier. We are the epitome of a saint soldier. We need to play that up. So I wouldn't say that there needs to be a push from Khalistani supporters to disassociate from militancy or fundamentalism. There's no crime in being a fundamentalist. Sikhs, or certainly some Sikhs, Amritdhari Sikhs, by pure definition, are fundamental Sikhs. It's not a dirty word.
Just in your opinion then, as a young Sikh and as a Khalistani, do you think the media will ever actually understand that notion if it is portrayed in such fashion as kind of Sikhs will be proud to have that kind of inner militant philosophy. Do you think media will ever kind of understand that when it's related to modern politics in regards to things like Khalistan?
In regards to modern politics, I think Western-centric and Eurocentric media will never understand it because they are coming from a perspective of living under a liberal democracy, and our version of Sikhi and politics are synonymous. You can't divide the two. Guru Nanak's revolutionary, excuse me, sorry, my throat is quite sore. Guru Nanak's politics are revolutionary and pure. He separated dirty politics from his incredible revolutionary path, and I think people from the West and Western media and stuff like that, they can't understand that because we, as a Sikh nation, we do not subscribe to democracy. Democracy is completely opposite to what our gurus would have wanted and the guru styles of politics and Khalistan essentially. So as a whole, no, I don't think they would ever understand. They need to step out of the Westphalian model of politics and away from this liberal democracy and away from liberalism as a whole to try and understand our version of politics.
Let's take some comments from the audience. Did you want to say something, Reed? Just with the mic. So.
Sorry, I just wanted to understand the context in terms of the stats.
Yeah, okay. Well, we did say at the start, I'm not sure if you were here, that it's a very small sample because we just didn't get a response. We sent it to approximately 200 different media outlets or individuals and got a very small response. And we haven't said this is 53% of the media feel this way. We've said 53% of those that responded to us have said this. But we'll be more specific because we were still sending out that questionnaire as of like an hour ago. And the last time I looked at stats was about 15 minutes before this event. So we'll put them all online. And again, it is a very small sample, self-admittedly. Any more comments, sorry?
Yes. I think the most salient point tonight is this dichotomy with what Dr Gurnam said about the non-Prasad resolution and what Amardeep and Shamsher said, sort of diverging from that. If you take the Khalistan movement before Operation Blue Star, it was all about the non-Prasad resolution, about civil rights, economic rights, about free banks and not having government banks, about investments, water rights, and things like that. This is what Sant Janil Singh campaigned for, and this is what he wanted. The Khalistan movement came after that, after Operation Blue Star, and we've forgotten about the non-Prasad resolution, and now we frame Khalistan as a romantic notion of we want our own country because everybody else got their own country. This is not historically accurate. What Sant Janil Singh wanted was those rights, for Punjab to be liberated from that corruption, from those lack of rights. So, you know, we can't disassociate ourselves from the militancy, but we've got to frame the Khalistan in those terms, into a political movement, which is what it was.
Jasmine Kaur.
Yeah, I 100% agree with your statement there. When we talk about the Khalistan movement in today's day and age and in the diaspora now, it's always spoken about as an independence movement and stuff like that, but we forget the historical context behind it. We need to look all the way back to 1947 when India came into inception as a so-called as one of the world's so-called biggest democracies, and we need to look back at how Sikhs have faced so much degradation and had their basic civil rights never acknowledged and never given to them, and we need to look back at things like the water politics in Punjab, and the Anandpur Sahib resolution is so important. And Sant Ji said himself, it's a direct quote from him, obviously I'm saying it in English, he was neither for, neither against Khalistan, but the foundations for Khalistan were laid when the Indian government, when Indian armed security forces invaded the Darbar Sahib with tanks and ammunition and stuff like that.
Do you have any more comments from the audience? Please raise your hand, or we'll share one more comment, then we're going to the next question.
I just want to say on the Anandpur Sahib resolution, the Anandpur Sahib resolution, there's a recent article where National Sikh Youth Federation is featured in the Caravan magazine by a guy called Daniel Block about Jagmeet, and he talks about the Anandpur Sahib resolution, and then he put up an interesting fact that the Indian government, when the Anandpur Sahib resolution was drafted, their official position was they're never going to accept these demands, and it was demonstrated through the Sikhs' political response in the Tarmiyud Morcha, which can be translated as the Sikh Civil Rights Movement, was launched in May 1982, 30,000 Sikhs courted arrest, and in October 60,000 Sikhs courted arrest. In February 1984, there was firing in Panipat where Sikh men were attacked, their beards were shaven. There was state-organized mob violence against peaceful Sikh protesters. So the Anandpur Sahib resolution fell on the wayside. The Tarmiyud Morcha took center stage. As a peaceful agitation, the state used mass arrest, genocidal violence in order to suppress Sikh dissent, and in order, like the Guardian says, to forge this psychological wedge between Sikhs and Hindus and turn it into a communal issue when it was about political issues. The Anandpur Sahib resolution is no longer relevant because the Khalistan constitution supersedes that. 1986 Sabat Khalsa, Khalistan is the Qawmi agenda, the national objective of the Sikh Panth, and that's something we're going to strive for, because the Anandpur Sahib resolution demands are never going to be met by the Indian government. And remember, the response to the Anandpur Sahib resolution demand, to the peaceful movement that was from 1947 onwards, right? 1984 didn't just happen out of nowhere. The response of the government to Sikh political agitations, peaceful protests, were mass arrests, with genocidal violence, was the attack on Darbar Sahib, was Operation Woodrose from 84 to 95, where over 1 million Sikhs were killed through state terror. So the response to from the government has been terror and incredible genocidal violence, and yet we're told that we're meant to speak about Khalistan without anger or without passion, and we need to go back to a document that tens of thousands of people have courted arrest for. It's moved on. We're talking about open warfare of the Sikhs engaging in military operations against the Indian government. The position of Khalistanis is that East Punjab is occupied territory by the Indian government. Open warfare. So the Anandpur Sahib resolution is completely out of date. It's outdated, and the new Khalistan documents need to be formed. New Khalistan positions need to be and are being formed by Sikh academics and intellectuals.
Okay, we'll move on to our fifth and final question of the evening. In what way could we see a change in media depictions of the Khalistan movement? Again, in what way could we see a change in media depictions of the Khalistan movement? I'm going to start with Jasmine Kaur, given that possibly by a decade or so, you're probably the youngest on the table. So if you'd like to give us your opinion on what way we could see a change in media depictions of the Khalistan movement.
Speaking, as you said, with a significant age gap between everyone else on the panel.
Possibly, we don't know. In what way could we see a change in media depictions of the Khalistan movement?
With different media depictions of the Khalistan movement, I think there could be different ways of engaging with Khalistanis, not just through like traditional media, as in like newspapers and things like that. Like different things need to be taken into consideration. Social media plays such a huge part in it, and just.
Do you think Sikhs need this to happen? Do you think that we need to see a change in media depictions of the Khalistan movement? Or do you think it can progress without any changes in the way general media covers this issue?
I think there needs to be changes, like drastic changes, because we're seeing as... When I was like talking about what I said before, when I was exposed to Khalistan in the media, like it was just immediately negative connotations and stuff like that, and I don't want people my age and younger to be exposed to things like that. There needs to be fair commentary, fair reporting, and there needs to be things from both sides of the spectrum. There can't just be constant negative streams of news regarding Khalistan and things and anything associated with it.
Going to Dr Gurnam Singh, not saying I'm going from the youngest to the oldest, but in what way do you think we could see a change in media depictions of the Khalistan movement? And from your perspective as somebody who just said you were around in the 80s, do you think that there hasn't been any change, and do you think there needs to be?
Well, I think that if we go back to the Gurbaksh Singh case, you know, when Gurbaksh Singh was at the Amsar Gurdwara, and also we have the Rajyawana Kesri Lair. And particularly the Kesri Lair, I think that what that for me, I was talking about that being our own Arab Springs. And at the time I did interview Harinder Singh, who came to the USA, and he felt that because at the time there were the Arab Springs, yeah? So I think that what we need to do is, you know, the narrative of our movement has been that this is a militant kind of terrorist movement, yeah, which is a total misrepresentation. But that even the Khalistanis now say that we are not in that phase now. That phase was a previous phase. And I think what we need to do is we need to build a popular people's movement. And to do that, we have to say that this is not just a Sikh struggle. Because once you say a Sikh struggle, by definition, then you exclude others in Punjab. And, you know, we are a bare majority in Punjab now. There are 30% of the people of Punjab are Dalits, who are as oppressed, if not more oppressed than we are. Once the Dalits start to join you, and if you look at in the Kesri Lair, and if you look at the Gurbaksh Singh, the Dalits were there. We need to bring folk singers. We need to bring a popular movement for justice, for democracy, and yes, for freedom as well. And that we should be able to define what that freedom is. And yes, if we want a referendum, then maybe that's the way forward. And we need to talk to other people in other parts of India, because if you go down to the south of India particularly, I've been in Tamil Nadu, they support our movement. They want their own kind of freedoms as well. And one last point, back to 84, you need to read your history. All of the Indian media condemned and presented Jasjit Singh as a terrorist and extremist. But there was one newspaper called the Dalit Voice, which is published by Dalits, who covered some stories all along that time and said, no, Jasjit Singh is a freedom fighter. He is a peasant who is setting an example for other poor people across India. And if you look at Pritam Singh's research, he's done research on the ground, and this was also something that was not covered by the Indian media. In 84, the uprising wasn't just in Punjab. We had peasants uprising across India who were actually seeing this as a peasant uprising. So we do need to change that narrative. I think that we need to see ourselves as revolutionaries, because that state is destroying India, it's destroying the people of the state. It's a violent state, it's a violence against women. It's terrible what happens against women, and it's violent against Dalits. So we need to create a broader narrative. And yes, for Punjab liberation, I think that that's the narrative that we need to develop, is the Punjab liberation movement. And there we then do not fall being accused of this being a religious fundamentalist narrative, which, whether we like it or not, that's the kind of narrative that we're...
So two interesting stats, which I'll present to you, Amardeep Bassey, and you can kind of continue on with this question. Firstly, the 84% of the media professionals, again, that responded to our questionnaire, they said that Punjab does need drastic changes when given examples of issues in Punjab, such as female infanticide, addiction issues, and cancer epidemic. So again, 84% of the media professionals that answered our questionnaire said they feel Punjab needs drastic changes. With that in mind, do you think what Dr Gurnam was just talking about, Amardeep Bassey, could actually help change media depictions of the Khalistan movement?
Yeah, I totally agree with Dr Gurnam in that it needs to be a much more inclusive grassroots movement. And again, talking about the Dalits and getting how important it is to get their support, we seem to have done the opposite. We seem to have lost Dalit support. There was the incident in Vienna, which led to a quite a sizable sect of Sikhism, whatever you want to call it, to actually declare we are no longer Sikhs. So we seem to be alienating certain sections of the Punjabi wider Sikh community. As far as the general question, in what way could we see a change in depictions? Social media does have a part to play, but the problem with social media is it can be a bit of a preaching to the converted and a bit of an echo chamber. You'll find the only people that retweet your tweets are Sikhs. So that's a bit of a danger with that. And in that respect, as I said before, there needs to be a sat-down, professional, broad, long-term and medium-term strategy. You need to have the Sikh nation or the Khalistan movement needs to get professional media people on board. And it's not as difficult or you know, there seems to be a slight state of paranoia in some parts. As I said, journalists are human beings. You need to form a bond with them, and you'll find that they are being led by you. It's too complicated an issue for any journalist sat here in the UK to really go into the historical ins and outs of the Anandpura. He just wants, as I said, 400 words, nice picture, black and white, for and against, bang, you're done. And the thing with that is that's a start, and we haven't got a start at the moment, really.
Dr Jasjit Singh, in your own opinion, in what way could we see a change in media depictions of the Khalistan movement? And if we, just to add further on, and more comments from the panel, please, what impact would this actually have on the Sikh community if we did see changes in media depictions of the Khalistan movement in either way, whether positive or negative?
Well, I think on the community itself, I think given social media and given the way articles are distributed these days, at least it would continue a dialogue, which before this event, you know, that really hasn't kind of happened. So it'd be welcome for the community itself. I was going to ask somebody a question about clickbait and how that actually, how has the clickbait environment post the print environment actually changed things in the way in which you know, stories need to be reported in quite sensationalist ways? Is there a pressure on journalists to actually report stories in particular ways, because now it's kind of linked to income as well? So
that's what I mean about it. As far as clickbait is concerned, or that easy digestible read, that's where we need to start. You need to just have 5 things you didn't know about Khalistan, 6 things you didn't, you know, sort of, I'd call it nonsense really, but it's a start. It's because at the moment your average British citizen, white, brown, black, will have no idea what the hell Khalistan is or what it's, and yet the movement's been around for what, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. Every Sikh knows about it, but anybody outside the wider Sikh community, you know, it's a crying shame, really.
So you think more digestible, kind of?
Yeah, more digestible, more friendly. You need to be a bit more forgiving of the silly media. It's a long-term game. You need to make a start somewhere. And this whole thing about, just going back on another point about separating militancy from Sikhism, it's one of the USPs of Sikhism is our militant background and the fact that you know, Dr Gurnam Singh said, in all means have failed, it is justifiable to draw the sword in defence. Now, you could say the whole Khalistan movement is an epitome of that. We drew the sword when all of the means have failed. Now, if you go away from the military side, are you therefore saying, well, we have other means that we still haven't exhausted then? All the whole, you know, all the sacrifices that were made and people have died, well, that was a mistake. I think what you've got to try and do is romanticise the whole thing. More of a Che Guevara revolution, civil rights movement, rather than this is for Sikhs, we need our own land and we're not going to stop at anything else. It needs to have you need to play the game. I keep saying the same thing.
I just want to drop in one stat before I pass to Shamsher Singh. Again, 53% of those that responded to our questionnaire felt Khalistan was not comparable to movements such as what is going on in Catalan in Spain, the Catalonian separatist movement, if you will. They said it's not comparable to things like that, and Quebec and Scotland were other examples. So with that in mind, Shamsher, in what way could we see a change in media depictions of the Khalistan movement? Does it rely on romanticising the narrative, as was just suggested?
I think that's a great point, and I think if the media did actually see Khalistan as the way Sikhs kind of see it, that this is a call for like our freedom and like our liberation, and we have these amazing values in Guru Granth Sahib, and we want to see what it would look like if a nation was with those values were central, where Guru was central. What would a nation look like where power was completely decentralized and in the hands of the people and not in the hands of the masses? I think we need to kind of understand what Khalistan would mean to us. I think it would be really good.
Who is the our and the us, Shamsher? Who is the our and us in this Khalistan narrative?
I think it would be really good if the media did kind of take that approach with us and kind of helped us kind of romanticize.
But who is us?
Khalistan.
You're not answering who is us.
Sorry, can I?
Does that include the Dalits? Does it include those people that might not be Amritaris, who might not be religiously orientated?
or is it an exclusive us?
So according to like, the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib, Niche Andar Neech, Jat Neech, Hu At Neech, so with the lowest of the low, those that have no power, the completely marginalized, the poor oppressed masses of the world that were armed by the Gurus to stand up against a political oppression, tyranny and injustice. So all of the people that have no power, that have been marginalized by oppression, Guru Nanak talks about this in Babar Bani, Sikhi talks about this, we know where we stand, where our allies are, and I think the conversation, the point I wanted to make before I was interrupted, I think media draws a lot from academia. And I think the conversation kind of needs to shift, especially as I would see, what my kind of personal desire would be, is that the media should draw more from Sikh academics that kind of frame what the larger conversations around Khalistan are and what they kind of mean to us as a people, and kind of break those language barriers of like theocracy, of militancy, of extremism, radicalism. And I think that academia has a lot more work to do. Sikh academia has a lot more to give to this conversation. Punjabi academics that write about this in Punjabi, I think the conversation is much, much further ahead, and I think we need to start seeing a larger representation in the media of Sikh ideas. But then I think this is where we're going to face a hurdle, because it's not really the media's kind of role to do that, and they kind of wouldn't do that. So I think perhaps as an activist, I would say, as an activist, I think we lose so much when we have to break things down into these kind of really, like, this is about the survival of our people, and it goes into deep ideas, and we need to refocus on who our allies are, the oppressed, the global south, the indigenous people, black people. Those are our allies, not whiteness, not modernity, and we need to show the world, like I think the Kurdish movement has done really well, that they stand with all the oppressed people. And I think we need to show what the parallels are between our kind of revolutionary Sikh ideology, and I think, but then again, I think the media, because the location is modernity and Europe, they're always going to see us as these backwards brown people, especially when they look like myself, as we are these radicals. And that's maybe my cynicism, my experiences with the media, and I don't know how that could change. I need to be seen as a human being first before I'm seen as a romantic objective, right? And like, so brownness is seen as romantic through Orientalization, but it's through like the Kama Sutra and stuff like that. It's weird. So as a Sikh with a gold damalla and a dari, like being an object of romanticism, I think it goes. These are really deep questions, and I'm sorry, maybe Dr Gurnam Singh, as an academic, doesn't want the conversation to be academic, which I find quite strange. But I think there needs to be much, much more in-depth representation, and I think it can be done very simply. But what I found in my experience, the media isn't interested, and because that there are funding sources, there is an agenda of the state. What the Indian government says on Khalistan is the most credible position. Everything below that is just what we believe personally. So what Santaji was, and how if we see Santaji as a thinker, as a theorist, as a strategist, as a politician, the media is always going to see him as a religious leader. I mean, like, Sikhi is described as the 5th largest religion, and we have a holy book called the Guru Granth Sahib. The media doesn't understand Sikhi, and what we've done through those kind of approaches, we've simplified Sikhi, that we believe in one God, we have free food, we have a holy book, it's called the Guru Granth Sahib, and we told that to the media, and now because of modernity and our relationship with the media, now that's what we tell our children. So the entire Sikh narrative is kind of been stripped of any nuance and complexity, and I don't think it's the media's role to be commenting on this type of stuff, because they only comment after stuff's happened. I think we need to be more proactive. There's other forms of media. We, as a community, we need to write more books. We use social media really well. I think media is becoming more and more
let's
obsolete.
sum it up there. So, no problem. We'll take a couple of comments from the audience, then we're going to give 30 seconds each to the panelists to summarize. And if we could be brief, Raji, please.
Yeah. So my comment is directed towards, so this is a comment, my comment is directed towards the panelists who stated directly and indirectly the idea that Khalistan narrative has not expressed itself in a comprehensible manner, or that we as individuals are hot-headed, passionate, or aggressive. Regarding the first, as I mentioned before, the Khalistan narrative has expressed itself and its position since the onset, in Punjabi and in English. This is in reference to letters and books that were written by the Kharkus in the 50s, 60s, 40s. And then regarding the second comment I made, insulting that I be defined as passionate or hot-headed or fundamentalist when discussing the idea of Khalistan. For example, I was born in Punjab and I grew up in a Punjab where I was not allowed to go a certain distance from my village because of a mandated curfew. I grew up in a Punjab where my family members ceased to exist the next day. I grew up in a Punjab where my friends ceased to exist the next day. So it's insulting the fact that I be defined as hot-headed and passionate. Perhaps the media should document rather than sensationalize my existence as a Sikh using terms that I choose to use, and also my existence as a Khalistani, and then lastly how my past still interacts with the present.
Any other comments from the audience? So from someone we haven't heard from, please, if VG on the far side, it would be Blue the Stop.
I think most of us here agree or want Khalistan in some sort of way. But I think the issue is, and some of us aren't confident speaking publicly about it or to our peers about it, is how it would actually play out in real life. Who would be elected? Who would...
Again, topics we're not looking to discuss here.
That's the issue where we find, myself included. Well, I agree with Khalistan and everything like that. I know
VG, sorry, I want to keep it focused on media portrayals and how that reflects on your opinion.
All of us need to be clued up, myself included, on how it would run. But,
There's been a lot of broad pursuit of the scene as media bashing. Just out of curiosity, you talk a lot about your data.
Yeah.
But how much of the mainstream media are actually invited at tonight's event? And I only ask you that question as a journalist and broadcaster, and also a member of the National Union of Journalists, the biggest union, 33,500 journalists in the UK. I'm somewhat alarmed with the figures that you're giving, and of course the allusion also to the Asian network. I've got my own views on the Asian network, I won't go there. But what I will say to the panellists is...
Sorry, can I respond to those? Because you asked a couple of questions. No, I'll respond to those firstly.
I have another question.
Did we invite members of the mainstream media? When we sent out the questionnaire, included an invite to the event, and again that was to approximately about 200, and if we're considering that we sent it out to news organizations as a whole, then probably way over 200. You're talking about several hundred invites that went out to the mainstream media. I did actually get a few responses of people that said they were coming that ended up cancelling, so the invites were widespread and people were invited from all over, media professionals, Indian groups, the Hindu Forum of Britain. Invites were sent to all of such groups. In regards, sorry, what was the second question? Did you have one?
I asked you quite a few actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
hard to keep up.
I've got one. So, Shamsher, I mean, your passion, your conviction, I share a lot of stuff that you're saying. The narrative on Khalistan, unfortunately, does have to change. And the reason is, for those words to come out in mainstream media, like the likes of Newsnight, Radio 4s, your Radio 2s, these are mainstream platforms. As a union, I can only ask you, and I can only encourage you to maybe work with me and maybe the organisation, and maybe give you a platform and maybe more media awareness of how to challenge those very challenging questions that Andy's also been asked, for example, on the Asian network. You know, the thing is, there is a cause, there is a fight. The prescribed list and the government Home Office list, you know, the word Khalistan, it's in black. You can't get away from that. It's just seen as a very militant and terrorist organisation. So I think the onus is back down to yourselves. You need to change slightly your narrative. Of course, as Amardeep also mentioned, you know, journalists, they only have a certain degree of time to do their work. They can only do their work, and they can only give the real narrative, of course, if the story's right. You know, you can't just make things look stuff up. But at the same time, it has to be balanced as well.
Can we all just do a 30-second summary, because we're now looking at 8:40, 10 minutes over the event, and then we'll call it a night. So if we go from left to right, if the panel agrees, just in 30 seconds, summary on your thoughts on anything you'd like the audience and our viewers to take away, starting with Dr Jasjit Singh.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks for this invite, by the way. Just talk about my report, which talks about a lot of the reasons why Sikh mobilised, talks about the reports of Dr Gurnam Singh, released with a press release in November. Mainstream media don't care, they didn't care. the University of Leeds chucked it all out, picked up by the Asian Network of Radio Leeds in terms of mainstream media, but otherwise, so resources are being produced for mainstream media, but unless people make a noise or misbehave, it seems that they're not really, so that's something that I think needs to change.
Again, firstly I'll say thanks very much for organising this event. It's been very refreshing. Coming to something like this is the first time I've ever, stood in a panel like this and actually have to kind of justify myself. And I'm absolutely fine with it. But my message would be, you need to know more about journalists. You need to go out of your way to make friends with journalists and to keep those, maintain those contacts so that you lead the agenda. Or you'll never be able to, you'll never be able to sit over the journalist's shoulder and make him write what you want him to write. And it is step by step. As I said, you might have to start off with a few sound bites. You might have to start off with your image not being as polished as you might want it to be. But it's the beginning. At the moment, we have nothing. I mean, you can count on one hand the number of journalists who work for any mainstream press in the UK who know what Khalistan is or have any idea what the background is. There's probably 3 in the whole country, and we're talking hundreds of journalists. And I think that's a real shame considering how big the Sikh community is. Just one final point I wanted to make. There's an international organisation called the Unrepresented People's Organisation, which is kind of a UN for those nations who are looking for a state, like Khalistan. In the past, they've had some success. Countries like Eritrea, who were part of this UNPO, then went on to get their own country, South Sudan. I'm intrigued to find out what happened with Khalistan in that Khalistan was one of the inaugural members in 1993 of this organisation. It was one of the leading members. Yet in 1995, they were permanently banned from this UNPO. The reason being that the UNPO, having spoken to them myself only yesterday, they said, well, the Khalistanis refused to adhere to our constitution, whereas every other nation looking for statehood has had no problem with it. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, if you isolate yourself from these international groups, then journalists don't have a peg, as we call it, to hang your story on. Where do we start? We can't just suddenly talk about Khalistan. You need to have some, and if you've got the backing of something like the UNPO, it's somewhere to start again. It's a beginning. It's a feature.
Jasmine Kaur.
First of all, I'd like to thank Sikh PA and Jasmine for holding this event. It's been very successful in my view, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I think first of all, I would like to reiterate once again, I do not think the media understand Khalistan. I've been very upfront about that from the very beginning of this discussion. I think as a whole, even before we consider our relationship with the media, I mean not our relationship, but Khalistan's relationship with the media, I think as a Sikh community ourselves, we need to stop being afraid about talking about Khalistan. We need to open the narrative, we need to explore it ourselves, and we need to stop being ashamed of what we are and the past and where we come from. I think we need to educate ourselves, educate future generations, and then maybe we can, once we understand it for ourselves, then only do we have a chance of making others understand.
I think there needs to be a shift out from us as a diaspora Sikh community, kind of making the media irrelevant in this kind of conversation to a certain point. I think there needs to be a shift from us as a diaspora community more towards Guru Granth Sahib, more towards our indigenous terms and concepts, and moving away from language that completely fails to kind of describe us or our movement. I think when Sant Jasjit Singh and the Sikhs from that period took the conversation into the world mobilized and manifested, the modern world manifested itself in mobilization of academia, state security forces, bureaucracy, media to silence the political dissent of an entire people. I think the media does understand Khalistan, because the media isn't just broadcast media, it isn't just newspapers, it's books and academics, and there's different versions of that, and there is a wealth of information about Khalistan. And I think the reason why our voice hasn't been presented is because we've gone through genocide and we've gone through state terror. 1 million people were killed between that period, and I keep stressing that point because we've internalized that violence. We've gone away from our connection to Gurmat, our connection to our language. We think, speak in English, and I think there's that radical shifting kind of needs to take place. The shifting of our epistemic center. Guru Granth Sahib is where we draw everything from, and I think that's beyond the role of the media. I think as far as the media is concerned, I think we should take on board like Amardeep has said, and he makes some really good points. I think we do need to kind of reach out, and I think this is where credit goes to Sikh Press Association for hosting these events and being constantly told. I think when they did an interview on the Nahal show, he said, well, this conversation's poisonous and there's divisions within the Sikh community that we're even incapable of kind of having this conversation, and I think that's completely inaccurate. And I think because of that internalized violence, coming from that generation, our parents didn't know how to speak about this. They internalized that fear. They told us not to speak about it. We don't have that fear because we haven't gone through state terror. So as a diaspora, we're much, much more confident and much, much more articulate, and we won't tolerate misrepresented, biased, contorted representations of us as not only human beings and Sikhs or as Khalistanis. So I think the entire landscape's shifted. That's what we do as activists, as National Sikh Youth Federation. It's our role to map this landscape and to understand and help us navigate as a community. So we develop the tools and the language to express the desire we have as a people for our indigenous native sovereignty, our Padshahi, and our pursuit for Khalistan. Khalistan Zindabad.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we've had this conversation itself, I think, represents maybe a new approach, and so that's fantastic. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to shift the narrative towards it not being an Amardari struggle. Now, I'm not saying that that Amardaris haven't got a real role to play in this. So I'd like to have clean-shaven people advocating for Khalistan. I'd like to have women like Jasmine advocating for Khalistan, so that the people out there see this as an inclusive movement. And I'd like to have Dalits particularly coming forward. And one other point I would say is that there's a narrative in India, which is a narrative of the Hindutva and the RSS, which is a narrative on which I think we can bolt on our struggles, because that's a narrative that the mainstream media is picking up. I know a lot of these liberal kind of media people who see the Hindutva as a fascist movement, yeah? And anybody who is going to challenge that fascist movement is going to get some airing. And I think that we need to be in there. In fact, we need to be saying that we are the natural opponents of fascism, of that kind of genocidal policy. We fought against Aurangzeb for the same things. And I think that we need to present that narrative. And I think that we will get a much better reception within the media.
Thank you. Just to close, Sukh Sodhi, very quickly.
So just on behalf of Sikh Press Association, I want to say a very big thank you to the panelists, but also to the Sangha for coming out and having this discussion tonight. We thought that it was a discussion worth having. We thought that it was a discussion that needed to happen, that was long overdue. So thank you for joining us in having that and for making that possible. We do want to continue these sorts of events in the future. I said at the beginning, they cost money to put on. Donations from the Sangha would be greatly appreciated. And we as an organisation, we don't want to dictate to the Sangha at all. We want to take from the Sangha. So for our next event, we want to ask you what you would like us to discuss. We want your feedback at the end of it. Please come to us in person, give it via Twitter, via Facebook, via email. There's so many ways in which you can feedback to us. We really appreciate it. We genuinely build off that. And in fact, this event is something that we've built off from feedback before. So we want your direction in terms of the future and the next events. And sort of on that note, being a Bantik organisation, obviously all thanks goes to Akaal Channel TV and Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.